So, I have a phobia that goes by a few names. Scopophobia or ophthalmophobia. The fear of being watched. What this means is that I have this weird compulsion. Whenever I see a doorway, a window, or virtually any surface that I believe someone could hide behind, I imagine a face peering out at me, staring. I imagine what I would do. What could I do? And you'll soon find out why I have this phobia. So, on to the story. I'll try my best to remember all the details, but my mind has repressed a lot of it. Around June of 2016, my mother and I were living in a small apartment. There was no basement or attic, obviously, but there was one tiny crawl space in the closet floor of my bedroom. I never looked in it. I suppose that some people would be overwhelmed with curiosity, but my mind had already imagined all the worst scenarios. And so, I decided to leave whatever dead bodies and ghosts were down there for whoever rented after us. It was a nice apartment. Small, but perfect for the two of us. We lived there for a few peaceful months until the noises started. It was nothing extreme, just the odd bump in the night, and particularly scratching. My mum just brushed it off as rats in the walls or something, and as long as they stayed in there, I saw no reason to get rid of them. A week or two later, I had already grown used to the noises. In fact, it almost became comforting in a way. After all, I never really liked silence. That is, until I awoke one night to a different noise. A rolling sound, eerily similar to the sound my closet made when I opened it. I peeked my eyes open and looked over, but I couldn't make anything out in the dark. I thought maybe that I saw something move, but I was well aware of how the mind plays tricks on you in the dark. There was only one way to find out though, so I turned on my lamp. When I turned on the light, I expected to just see a closet full of coats, but what I saw was much, much worse. It was an eye. And not just an eye, but the entire half of someone's face, barely visible in the tiny crack he had opened. He didn't even react to being caught. No smile, no fear, just watching. My heart has never beat faster than that night, and I wished I screamed or maced him or anything, but I just stared back, frozen in time until I couldn't hold it in anymore. I began sobbing loudly, and I think I tried to say something along the lines of, "What do you want?" but it was garbled by my crying. He opened the door more and I could see his entire body, which I don't care to describe as I've spent 2 long years trying to forget that face. He said, "Shh," and I lost my breath at that. Hearing him made it real. I couldn't pretend that this was some fucked up hallucination anymore, and at this, I sat up and pressed my back against the wall. "It's okay." He said it so cheerfully. It gives me chills just remembering it, in fact. And this is when I finally had the courage to just run out of the room. This creep knew my name too. My fucking name. My mum, still half asleep while she called the police, thought that I had imagined it. Of course, by the time that the police had got there, he was long gone. All that was left of him was that damn crawl space. I never did look inside, but writing this now, I kinda wish I did. Having some sort of proof of this would, I don't know, maybe comfort me. Because at least you all would know that I'm not crazy. Apparently, he had been living in there. For how long? I don't know, but the officers who first arrived on the scene said that there were tally marks inside the crawl space. And I really did not want to know how many. I didn't want to know whether he was marking days or weeks. I just wanted to leave that fucking apartment. And eventually, we did. The police never did find him. Well, not for certain. They thought they found a homeless man who matched his description, but he was apparently unresponsive. I've always thought that they didn't take it all that seriously. They just thought that he was a squatter, even after I told them that he knew my name. They thought that given how long he'd been seemingly squatting, he had probably just heard my name through the floorboards or something. Since that night, he has been the face that I always see when there's an open door or closet. It's grown more distorted as time has gone on, but I can always make out a part of his pursed lips, as if he's still shushing me, even now. It's gotten easier with time, but I don't think that it'll ever leave me completely. Anyways, I guess that we never really actually had rats. TV shows and movies usually depict abductors driving white or black vans. I didn't realize this until I decided to buy a white one myself. A 1994 Dodge Ram cargo van to haul some of the gear I needed for work. While driving it, I've been pulled over by cops and searched 3 times for no reason. But that's another story. But the point is that some people see vans as just suspicious. One day while returning home, a woman pushing a stroller stared at me for a long time while I drove along my home street. We have speed bumps and I had a lot of expensive, delicate gear in the van, so I was driving pretty slow. She stared at me, wide-eyed, the entire time, so I smiled at her, like a friendly neighbor does. She was staring so intently she almost walked the stroller right off the edge of the curb. I thought it was pretty funny and almost forgot about it. A week later, our HOA email thread heats up when a resident sends out a notice that his wife and toddler were being stalked by a man in a white van. Fearing a pitchfork and torch mob mistaking me for the creeper, I replied to all saying that I lived in the neighborhood and also drive a white van. I even provided my license plate number and home address. A big mistake, I know. Jokingly, I also added that I witnessed a suspicious person in the neighborhood, a woman with a stroller who was staring at me so long and hard that it made me uncomfortable. I provided the date and time of the incident to see if their alleged stalker was actually me. And it was. And the dude got really triggered. He started sending me email after email, CCing everyone on the list, telling me that he can read between the lines of what I was saying. His accusations became just more and more ludicrous by the day and even turned into personal attacks. Several neighbors on the email list replied that he was behaving badly, in fact. The emails did eventually stop, but things got even weirder. On several occasions while out walking my dog, a 10-ish-year-old girl would come out of her house, run over to me awkwardly, and chat me up about my dog and give me strangely intimate details of her life. I wondered why this child was talking to strangers, but thought that maybe she just knew me from the neighborhood, so I politely played along. But then, one day, the girl shows up at my house. She said that she was angry because her dad wouldn't let her have a dog like mine, so she wanted to visit my dog for a while. Obviously, I told her that I needed to talk to her parents before I could ever let her visit my home like this. She said okay and left, and after that, I never saw her anymore. I have 2 daughters of my own, and one of their friends told me that the girl who was chatting me up is the daughter of the triggered dude from the HOA email list. Apparently, he had been sending her out to talk to me and take pictures. And my daughter's friend was friends with this bait girl. The poor girl's dad was making his own daughter uncomfortable, which is why she confided in her friend. The dad was sending his daughter out to chat to me so that he could accuse me of, well, I don't even know what. One detail that I did forget to mention, though, was that I have dash cams in all of my vehicles, and CCTV monitoring my front door. So, the initial incident with the wife, as well as the girl coming to my door, were both recorded. I emailed the triggered dude and kindly offered him copies of the videos of each incident. I also told him that I was concerned that his daughter was behaving inappropriately towards strangers. Apparently, this scuttled his plan, as I have never heard from him again after that. I grew up in a village near Munich in southern Germany. It was maybe the safest and most peaceful place on earth, with a few young families fleeing the stupid rents in the city and a few elderly couples. Close to my parents' house, there is a little nature conservation area, maybe about 2 to 3 kilometers squared in size, with a forest and a few little lakes. Entrance isn't forbidden, but there's no path leading deeper into the area, and it can be quite overgrown and wet, so normally nobody would go deeper inside. However, I've always had an interest in wild and natural places like that, and when I was allowed to play outside alone, I soon started exploring it, and it became my favorite playground. One day, if I remember correctly, I was 9, I found a small clearing deep inside the forest, covered by a flower meadow. In late summer, it honestly just looked like paradise itself. Over the next years, I came there whenever I wanted to be alone, and when I needed time for reading and dreaming and drawing, and when I grew older, also sunbathing and other stuff. And during all this time, I never told anyone about it, and I never saw a single sign of any other person there. The meadow was my little secret, and I felt safe at home there. Years later, I went there to do some reading and sunbathing, and since I never saw anyone there, I mostly stayed topless while doing so. I must have fallen asleep at some point, and when I woke up, I saw an old, maybe 50-year-old man sitting directly beside me. He was maybe 1.8 meters in height, dressed in light outdoor clothing, and had a camera hanging around his neck. I got the shock of my life and yelled and tried to somehow cover myself up, but all my clothes were out of reach, so all I could do was press myself to the ground. He was just sitting there, looking at me, and it told me how beautiful I was and how glad he was to see me again. I asked him to turn around to allow me to get my clothes, but no, you don't really need to be ashamed, and I just want to chat a bit. The man told me about his life and asked casual questions: where I live, what my name was, how was school going, what about boys, and stuff like that. At first, my answers were pretty short, hoping that he would just leave me alone, but he clearly had no intention to do so. After a few minutes, he even asked if I would allow him to shoot some more pictures of me, because I looked like a nympha, and he would like to preserve me forever. I, of course, refused. But now, something changed in his behavior. His whole appearance became harder, and he said with a creepy cold voice, and I'll never forget this sentence: "You know, you really are stupid for a naked little girl, all alone in the forest." At this point, I became scared as hell, jumped up and ran into the forest, leaving all my stuff behind. He didn't try to follow me, but was just sitting there and laughed. I came back after lurking around for about 2 hours to get my stuff, and he was gone and left most things behind, except for my t-shirt and bikini top. I grabbed all my stuff, tried to cover myself with my skirt, and ran home as fast as I could. I never did tell my parents, but after that, I never visited that meadow again. So, I pretty much grew up in a nice little neighborhood where all the families and kids played together. We all went to the same school, and all the parents knew us, and we were free to roam as long as we were home before the streetlights came on. We pretty much knew everyone, or at least recognized them if they lived in the same area. Here's where the guy in the wheelchair comes in. He's well known. He was always strolling through the streets. He actually lived on the same street a few houses down, in fact. And no one ever really talked to him. He stuck in his own group of friends. He always gave me a weird vibe, though, anytime I came across him, but it never gave me a reason to not trust him at all or anything. Well, one day, my sister and I, we were maybe 6 and 10 at the time, were riding our bikes as we usually did, when the guy in the wheelchair turned our street. My gut told me that something was off, and I slowed down my bike and told my sister to ride ahead of me. But then, the guy rolls faster down the street and tells us that he needs help. I instantly tell him that we couldn't help him and that we needed to get home. But he keeps saying, "I really need help. Please help me." I tell my sister to ride as fast as she can home. And this guy, no shit, stands up and starts running after us. We jump off our bikes and run inside telling my dad what happened. And long story short, my dad and my older cousin went down to his house when he was sitting outside with his friends. My dad yells at us to stay inside, and apparently my dad pistol whipped him and told him to never even look at our direction ever again. Needless to say, anytime he's seen us since then, he would roll his ass to the other side of the street. Just for a better understanding of my surroundings, I'm from Kentucky. There's lots of wooded area and people love their guns here, including me. I used to not believe that there was unknown stuff in the woods. I thought maybe Bigfoot, maybe, could be real, but I severely doubted it. After this happened, I know for sure that there is something unknown out there. I had just bought my first AR-15 style rifle, a Ruger AR-556 for anyone who cares, and bought a 60-round drum magazine for it at Gander Mountain while they were going out of business because why the fuck not, right? Reading up on the drum, I read that they were amazing and rarely had any issues at all. This will be important later. A few days after I got it, I finally decided to take it out for a test drive and sight in my gun a little better. And here's where everything just went to shit. As I said above, Kentucky is super wooded. 3/4 of the land I lived on was just totally thick woods. There was a main path for driving our gator, and a few small paths our cows had made in the woods. But apart from that, there was very little. I decided to walk along our creek that had a small path, half cleared by our cows. At the end of the path is a big field our cows graze in, and where I sight in guns when the cows aren't there. As soon as I crossed the fence to go to the field, I instantly felt like I was being watched, closely too. I brushed it off because I've walked back there 1,000 times before and never been bothered by anything. So I keep walking and ignoring the feeling of being watched, but at the same time, I'm very aware of it too. I know I feel like I'm being watched, but I wasn't giving it any noticeable attention. The walk to the field along the creek is a pretty short walk, maybe 2 minutes at a slow pace. The further I walked though, the more intense this feeling got, like I was getting closer to whatever was watching me. About halfway there, the feeling got so intense that I couldn't ignore it anymore. The drum magazine I had with me was unloaded, so I stopped and started loading it. I only bought 20 rounds with me because I was just going to sight in my gun and 20 should have been plenty. So, now I'm stopped, paying extremely close attention to what's going on around me and loading my magazine. The exact moment that I started putting rounds in the drum, I smelt something dead. Like it had been dead for a while and rotting in the sun. I started looking around, and right behind me was what was left of a possum. It was totally torn to pieces too. It was almost like it was placed there for me to find it. But the thing was is that it looked like it had been dead, maybe a day at most, and what I was smelling seemed like it was far more decomposed. This obviously didn't sit well with me, so I double-timed it on the magazine loading. In hindsight, I guess I should have taken the dead possum as a last chance to turn around. I decided to keep going, though. I had never had any problems back there before, so I assumed my brain was just being paranoid or something. I was almost to the field when I saw it. I was at the end of the creek, and the feeling of being watched was unbearable at this point. Just as I was near the end of the creek and the edge of the woods, I heard a splash in the water. Me, being on edge, immediately turned toward the noise, gun ready but no round in the chamber. And walking down the creek, away from me, was something that I'll never forget. It was at least 8 feet tall, probably taller, really skinny. I mean, imagine a grown man that weighs 120 pounds, and now stretch him out to be 8 feet tall, but his body width stays the same. It had very long arms and walked on 2 legs, skin stretched tightly across its body, and it made no noise aside from the splash when it stepped into the creek while it walked. It also had a very weird walk, almost like a waddle, but taking large steps. But that could have been because it was on a muddy creek bank. It was also a light brown color, almost like the color of a deer or something. And that's all I can remember. Now, I knew why I felt while I was being watched. Magazine loaded, bolt ready to send a round into the chamber, I got myself steady. Remember what I said earlier about the magazine being extremely reliable? Well, I pressed the bolt release on the gun to chamber a round, just in case this monstrous thing decides to attack or something. I didn't intend to strike first or anything, though. But the round, it gets stuck somehow, and doesn't even budge out of the magazine. I had never used that magazine before, so it didn't fail from heavy use or anything. And a bolt closing from a gun has enough force to break your finger. So, why didn't this magazine work? My only guess is that the thing had something to do with it. The magazine never worked right again after that too, and I had to return it to Magpul. Needless to say, I didn't tell them that this happened. I just told them that the magazine failed several times. Anyway, the gun jammed on the first round, which is usually the easiest. The thing books it out of there without running or making a noise. I had just long enough exposure to it to get the details that I provided earlier. But now, for assumptions. It happened about late May last year. I still have the emails from Magpul regarding the drums, so I'm using those as reference because after this, I needed something reliable. As for what the creature was, me and a friend who knows more about this stuff than I do have decided that it could have been a Wendigo. I know, it sounds crazy, but the reason we think it was a Wendigo is because everything I described matches them near perfectly. I had read that they were incredibly thin and tall, have a stench of death that follows them everywhere, which explains the smell of the possum. They're very fast, can be several colors, light brown included, and that they sometimes violently kill other animals to scare humans away. Again, the possum. The only thing that we couldn't come up with was its behavior. Why am I still alive if this Wendigo actually existed? Wendigos are supposed to be incredibly aggressive. Aside from watching me, it really did nothing. It didn't try to attack or confront me, and it ran from me like it was scared or trying to draw me to somewhere where it wanted me to be. This all being said, I've never had another encounter with it. I've gone to the same field, taken the same path expecting to be watched, and have not gotten that feeling of being watched as strongly as that day ever since. Something was definitely out there, and you, or anyone else, can't convince me otherwise. I've tried to trick myself into thinking that I'm being watched out there, and it still had no comparison between that day. If any of you guys have ever seen anything like this, I sure would be grateful for some comments. Anyway, I just needed to talk about this to get it off my chest. Also, sorry for the novel, guys, but I felt like I needed to include every detail that I could to better explain the situation. The little details really bring out how absolutely fucked I could have been. Every little thing just happened to line up to screw me. This happened a couple of years ago. I was a 9 or 10-year-old boy and was on the beach with my family and a friend of mine's family. She was around 11 or 12 at the time. At some point, me and my friend wandered away from our families and were just playing around on the beach. We decided to explore the nearby area around the beach and got to a secluded spot in a forest that was maybe 5 or 10 minutes from where our families were. When we got there, we met a man who was all alone there. He was maybe in his mid to late 30s, and when he saw us, he smiled and walked towards us. We just stood there, not really thinking anything of this, but he started the conversation by saying something along the lines of, "Hey there, I'm a photographer for a model agency, and I couldn't help but think that you two would be perfect for a photo shoot." He continued by saying how he thought my friend was really pretty and that if we agreed to the shoot, we would make a ton of money. At the beginning, we were really excited and we told him that we just wanted to make sure that it was all right with our parents. And this is when it started to get kind of weird, but I didn't really think anything of it just yet. He said that we should just follow him and not tell our parents anything, and it wasn't far from here, and he kept talking about all the money that we'd make if we just followed him without saying a word. My friend started to get skeptical and said that we weren't interested and started to walk away while grabbing my hand to make sure I followed her. He started to follow us though, raising his voice a bit and again continued talking about that if we just followed him and we did the shoot that we'd make so much money. This is when my friend held onto my arm really hard and we just booked it. He stopped following us and he also stopped saying anything. And when I looked behind me as we ran, I just saw him staring at us with a really annoyed look on his face. We told our families about this, and some of the adults went to where we said that we saw him, but of course, he was gone by now. I'm really grateful to my friend for realizing that something with the situation that we were in just wasn't right, because it could have been a whole lot worse. So back in 2014, I was your average angsty teen, a 17-year-old female, average build and blonde, and I was in Argos with my friend, her friend, and her baby. It was a summery day, and I was wearing shorts, and due to the fact that I'm curvy, I wear tights to prevent chub rub, which is something all the curvy girls will understand, I'm sure. For those not from the UK, Argos is like a crappier version of IKEA. So we walked in talking about what we were going to buy, because the woman who came with me, my friend, was having another baby. As we walked into the store and started checking out the catalogs, a 6-foot-plus beer-smelling guy came up to us and introduced himself by shaking my hand and loudly saying, "My name is Roundus," or something. We obviously thought that this was weird because he came over to us from the other side of the store. So we just tried to ignore him and walked off, back to where he was. As we walked to the queue, he tried saying something to us again, but he was mumbling and speaking a different language. I'm guessing Polish or Russian or something, and I watched him leave in my peripheral vision, convinced that he was gone. And so I relaxed and continued chatting. Now, bear in mind, I was in the midst of my rebellious stage, and had several tattoos by this point, including bows on the backs of my legs, mid-thigh, like where the stockings would be. Next thing I'm aware of, there's this wet sensation on the back of my leg. I turn around, looking down to see this weirdo getting back up and walking away after licking my tattoo. Gross, I know. I froze in shock as this guy walked away after licking my leg for a solid 15 to 20 seconds. The store assistant called the police for me, and I called my boyfriend in hysterics. The police came by my house the next day. I lived with my housemates to speak to me, and they also asked if it was possible for a DNA sample. They wanted to swab my leg, but unfortunately, I had already showered. Luckily, though, my tights and shorts were still on the floor from when I threw them when I took them off upon my arrival home. So I gave my tights to the police, and about a week later, I heard back from them that the man had been arrested for licking the legs of several other women, given 6 months jail time and community service. In the end, this weirdo was locked up, and I'm grateful for that. But had I been alone or in some other place where I wasn't surrounded by people, I'm pretty certain that this guy was brazen enough to have tried something else. I grew up just north of New York City. Living in a pretty densely populated metropolitan area, I always looked forward to the summer when my father and I went backpacking upstate. We had a spot about an hour north of Lake George in the Adirondacks and camped a few nights every summer. One trip, a few years back now, we were driving to the trailhead. On a long, narrow dirt road, we saw a car pulled over with a few people arguing outside the car. This isn't the most secluded spot in the world, so it's not uncommon to see another family there or anything. But it was weird that a car would be pulled over here with no real access to any trails. As we drove closer, a man walked over and waved at us. We assumed that they were having car trouble, and my father rolled down his window. Suddenly, a female in the group screamed, "Get away from him," and the man suddenly had a serious face and began sprinting towards us. He was tall, well-built, and was moving quickly. My father slammed on his brakes and quickly pulled the car into reverse, and the man stopped and let out a sigh. We just sat there, parked, confused. The man reached towards us, but we were a good 10 or so yards away, and then he darted off the road and into the woods. Cautiously at this point, we drove slowly to the parked car. There were 3 women, crying. They were apparently his sisters, and he had returned home from the army a few months prior. According to the women, shortly after he got back, he began acting odd and was diagnosed with PTSD, as well as an early onset of Alzheimer's disease. The women got back in their car and headed for town. They said that they were going to the ranger station to get help locating him. The rest of the day was fairly uneventful. We hiked to our campsite, fished for a bit, and set up camp for the night. Sitting next to the fire, though, my father and I felt some really strange vibes. We weren't even sure whether the women were telling the truth or if the man was trying to ask for help or something. And what was more disturbing was the fact that we were camping only a few miles away from where the man ran off. We weren't sure if he was violent, armed, or if he had followed us even. Typically, my father and I slept in different tents, but that night we decided to stay in the shelter together. It was basically a small log cabin with 3 walls and an open front, where the fire pit was located. Neither of us slept too much that night, and it was probably just my imagination, but I swear that I felt like I was being watched and heard a few things. Though my father and I didn't hear any outright footsteps or anything out of the ordinary. The next morning, I left camp to take a leak, and a few hundred feet away from our camp, I saw a small fire pit on the trail. I placed my hand on the ashes, and they were absolutely soaked, which means that someone had a fire here very recently and poured water all over it. We had food and supplies for 4 nights, but after I found that fire pit, we broke camp and just left that morning. This was around 2009, so I was about 11 or 12 at the time. I live in Rhode Island, which is pretty small, and I lived a very sheltered life. I got my first laptop around this time, and every day after school, my group of friends and I would log on to AIM and talk about school, boys. You know, usual middle school things. I don't know if any of you remember, but there were AIM public groups where you could meet strangers back then. And that's where my story begins. A group of my friends and I went into a public AIM group, just being stupid. Making jokes and sharing YouTube videos. One guy took a certain interest in me and he added me so that we could talk privately. I don't remember what we talked about really. School, anime, about my friends. Looking back, I think that he was grooming me, but nothing seemed off about him at the time. He was a 32-year-old black man and I can't remember his name for the life of me. But he lived in a neighbouring state of Connecticut, which isn't too far from me. I had actually hoped to meet him since he was really nice to me. I was young and was being bullied in school, so anyone online seemed like an escape at the time. He and I talked about Vocaloids, and for those who don't know what that means, it was a program where you could make it sing any song or create your own, almost like auto-tune, but not in your own voice. It wasn't as popular back then, but I was really excited to have a friend who liked what I did. Things went by normal for a while. I used to do YouTube videos, anime music videos, and he had me subscribed on my old account. I even remember showing him a song called Luka Luka Night Fever, and he put it into his favourites, which I was really happy about at the time. But one day, he began being different. He asked to call me on the phone, and I was one of the only kids in my class who didn't have a cell phone at the time, and I didn't want my family to catch me on the house phone with a stranger, so I politely said, "I can't, sorry." And to this day, I remember his answer. He said, "Call me, or I'll kill you, and sexually assault you." Smiley face. Now, I was sheltered, like I said, but I knew this was wrong, so I panicked. My throat clenched up and I threw up and I blocked him immediately. I should have called the cops, I know. I should have told my mum, but I didn't. I was so afraid that I had done something wrong, that they wouldn't take me seriously, that I would have my computer taken away. He knew that I was 11 or 12 too. As soon as he had realized what I had done, he sent AIM spam bots on me, and it was to the point where it crashed my computer. They all had obscene sexual names too. I made a new account on AIM and pretty much just forgot about him after that. I log on to YouTube sometime after this and I see that I have a new message. Expecting it to be my friend from Sweden, a young girl around my age. I get excited and quickly open it. And my heart sinks, because it's him. I still remember the name of his YouTube account too, and he's still active on it today. He says something along the lines of, "Hey, my cousin got the Vocaloid program. Unblock me and I can send you a copy." I knew that I couldn't ever forgive him for what he said, and honestly, I was scared of him. I didn't block him on YouTube though, and to this day, I'm not sure why. I don't know if I even knew how to back then, so that could have been the reason. The messages keep coming, and I answered a few. They're all, "I miss you so much, and I'm sorry." At one point, I even think that he said that he loved me. I eventually lost interest in my YouTube account, since it was under my real initials and last name, and I made one under a fake name to protect myself. I had a lot more subs on my old account, so I decided to log in and upload a video saying I was back. This was like 3 or 4 years ago, and the minute I do, I got a message from him. It read, "I missed you, baby. You're so beautiful." I check his YouTube channel, and there's that damn song, Luka Luka Night Fever, featured on his page. I deleted the messages, and I deleted every video after this. but every time I got a message request on Facebook, YouTube, anything, I got anxious, and it still worries me. To this day, I've never gone to Connecticut, no matter how much I wanted to. I'm always afraid that he'll recognize my face and approach me or something. Plus, to be honest with you, I don't know if he's got my details or number or even knows where I live, so I'm still very much in the deep end. Anyway, I sure hope that he doesn't know where I live still, and as far as AIM goes, I'm never going back there again. I'm from the UK, and at the time of this story, I was 16, and I had recently left high school and had just started a course at the local community college. For many years, I've been wondering about an experience I had whilst in college when I went on a week-long trip to an activity centre in Calder Forest in the northwest of England. It was one of my first trips away from my home by myself, and we slept in a dorm-type room, and I shared a room with 4 other girls. A couple of nights into the trip, and we switched the lights off and fell asleep. I don't know how long we had been asleep for, but I was awoken when one of the girls loudly whispered my name. She was on the bottom bunk next to mine, and she told me that somebody was sitting at the foot of my bed. When I looked up, there was a shadowy figure sitting by my feet. It was then that I noticed other shadowy figures standing around the room and sitting on the other beds. The friend that first awoke me noticed the same thing too, and there must have been about 5 or 6 in total. We woke the other girls, and they also saw all the shadowy figures around the room. And as if that wasn't freaky enough, although we couldn't make out definitive facial features, they looked a lot like boys in our class. We tried to call out to them, begging them to answer, but they didn't. They just stood or sat there. And it was really creepy because they were just staring at us. We made that much noise that one of the teachers ran into the room, and when they switched the light on, nobody was there. They just disappeared. I had initially thought that it was the boys playing a prank on us, but when the light was switched on, honestly, they just all vanished. I have always wondered what this could have been, and why they looked like boys from our class even. I have never been so scared in all my life. And needless to say, we didn't get much sleep that night, and nobody believed us the next day. It would be great if anybody had any thoughts on why the shadowy figures took on forms of my classmates of all things, and what the hell all this could mean. This story took place about a year and a half ago when I was 17. And it was autumn in Campsie, Sydney, Australia, that the following happened. I was having an otherwise alright day. It was the weekend, and I'd earlier decided to catch the train 1 stop over from where I lived and go shopping in the district, Campsie. I'd already brought a couple of dresses and a hat when I decided to sit down and have some lunch. I couldn't pass up a chocolate milkshake and a takeaway burger. The day was nice, so I chose to sit in the communal sitting space with trees and stores sporadically spread around me. Being naturally a people watcher, I sat quietly on my own as I ate and just watched people go about their day. I soon, however, noticed a man seemed to be watching me too. He was rather tall, tanned, and had dark hair and sharp facial features. If I had to guess, I'd say mid-30s, but I didn't think much of him at first. He was just another person around me. Without a second thought, I'd carelessly went on my day. I bought a couple more items of clothing, a large teddy bear and cute key rings. I was having a lot of fun shopping, nothing more or less. The time, however, soon came, about 3 or 4 hours later, where I decided it was time to head home. I headed, satisfied with my purchases, back to the train station. I was halted as I stared up at the train map, not knowing which platform to be on for my ride home. I stood for a good few minutes before a man tapped me on my shoulder. I turned around attentively and, slightly confused, realized that it was the same man from earlier. Tall, tanned, dark hair, and the same sharp facial features. "Hey, do you need some help?" he had innocently asked, to which I again rendered harmless. Yes please." I was actually relieved to have an adult aid me on my way home, because I was worried and anxious that I might be lost. Honestly, it wouldn't be the first time that I've missed or taken the wrong train, too. The man then asked me where I was going, and I told him. He then showed me the platform, and easy as that. Simple. Over. Or not. Whilst I sat, awaiting my train, I noticed him again. He came, almost anxious-looking, down the stairs and then over to me. Respectfully and cautiously, I stood face to him. "Come home with me," he almost directed. Sorry?" Obviously, I was confused. "I said, come home with me, now." His tone got more fierce, and I realized that he was being serious. I was borderline shaking as he persisted with this too. Keep in mind, I'm an extremely nervous and anxious person at the best of times. I've been so all my life, in fact. I was too scared to even scream or make a fuss. Moreover, I'm worried that if someone tried anything, that this guy may have done something. Sir, I don't think..." I quietly began to refuse before he cut me off. "You're coming with me," he sternly spoke again, and with that, the unfortunately prompt train arrived. I wanted to refuse him again, but he grabbed my bag and shopping bags out of my hands and went onto the train. I rushed on to get them back, people entering following suit, and the doors closed. The man, then, still holding my belongings, walked to a seat and ushered me to sit with him. Considering he still had my belongings, I did so. I sat blankly beside him for a moment, completely still and silent. I felt a genuine fear creep in, the kind that makes you just want to cry. After a little bit, I knew my stop was the next one over, but he still had my bags. Should I ditch my belongings with him and just escape? But he has my ID and my address, my bank cards. That seemed even more dangerous. But sitting here and feeling scared was dangerous too. I had to do something. Taking a minute to compose myself, I later lifted my head and tried to think more rationally. We were still a little bit from home by the looks of things, and I next looked over to the creeper beside me, quite warily, only to see him scrolling through his phone. He had pictures of me on it. Pictures of me looking at the train station map. Pictures of me looking through dresses on a rack. Pictures of me waiting to cross the road. They were pictures of me. I wanted to be sick at this moment because he had multitudes of pictures of me, just living out my day. How careless I'd been to not notice is all I can think of in hindsight. Wanting to get off this train and get off now, I pretended my phone rang. I answered it loudly and stood. I talked on the phone to no one as loud as I could and drew attention from idle passengers. Of course, they were more so just annoyed or curious of what I was doing than concerned for me. However, any attention was good attention at this point. I didn't feel so isolated and trapped by the man trying to force me home with him. He shrank back in his chair slightly, and I used my pretend phone to call and act as if I was in a hurry to get home. I loudly exclaimed my worry to my sister, to which none existed, and made sure people watched. I kept their eyes my way as I grabbed my bags back off the man who snatched them, clear witnesses to if he tried anything. I felt like an idiot for talking so obviously loud. It was really embarrassing, but also necessary. I went over towards the train door as soon as I'd gotten my items back and played out the fake phone call. As soon as the doors opened, I felt relief. I put my phone in my pocket and began walking, but it was short-lived. "Wait!" he called from behind me as he ran up and grabbed my shoulder. I was turned around and then greeted by further demands. "At least give me your phone number then." I tried to refuse this, but he pulled out his phone and opened up the dial pad and then shoved it at me. "Give me your phone number. If it's not yours, you come home with me." His words continued to scare me. I doubted my safety all the more after this and figured that I was safest to oblige. After doing so, I just turned and walked home, crying and in a panic. I looked over my shoulder all the way home, only to have small breakdowns whenever he'd text me. I still have the text, in fact, and they read as follows. "I want to be with you. I go to your house to find you, okay? Can you give me your address? And less coherently, and finally, what country did you? Do you have any difficulty? I can give you money or food. Let us together tonight." When I got home, I informed my aunt and uncle whom I lived with at the time immediately, and we went to the police station to file a police report. I handed over his number, the text, and told them everything. And I'm still not sure what happened to him since then, nor where the pictures he took of me might be. I can only hope that this is the worst that he's done to anybody, and ever will do so, because, man, was he scary. Since high school, I've learned that some of the most rewarding purchases are the most annoying transactions. When I was about 17, I decided to get my driver's license because I was tired of spending so much time at my house with my parents. They weren't bad people or anything, but my mum liked to yell at the political news channel with my dad, and it got old fast. After I got my license, I was using a text service called QWERTY, which had gone out of business, and I was left without a phone. Because having a cell phone had been decided necessary by my parents, I had to go purchase my own. They would pay for it, and I would work around the house to pay them back, but I had to get it and do all the hard work. I didn't live in a bad area, but the Radio Shack was in a sketchy part of town where a lot of prostitution and drug dealers ran their businesses. I never remember hearing of anyone getting hurt, but the people, they were definitely really sketchy, and one apartment down the road on the way to the Radio Shack absolutely was dangerous. It was a popular place for opioid addicts and drug dealing. It was closer to my house than I like to admit, and I didn't think anything of it most of the time. So I'm at the Radio Shack, and people keep making the process difficult. Between the girl who first checked me out and started activating the phone, to her not only activating the wrong phone but bricking it, it was a long process. Finally, though, we get all set up, and they're telling me to set up security on my phone and a backup passcode. I do, but it's one of those swipe pattern codes, and I ended up forgetting it the second I got back into my dad's truck. I was driving back at about 8 p.m, and I have to stop at the intersection by the drug den apartments. I'm approaching from the east going west, and the road is barren except for two other people also driving west. The one truck turns right to head north, and a man is standing at the northwest corner, waiting to cross going east, past us. The orange PT Cruiser ahead of me is stopped at the red light, and we're waiting to go. The truck turns, and I didn't take note of the pedestrian, but the light is green and we haven't moved. I wait for a second before I look to honk the horn, and the car ahead of me backs up a bit, scaring me and making me full panic. I'm new behind the wheel, and I don't put the car in reverse. I put it in park, and I'm pressing on the gas but not moving. I'm trying to figure out what gear I'm in, but I can't find the display in my panic, and the orange PT Cruiser takes off. I'll never forget the guy that was standing in the road ahead of me. I still worry about him walking around when I have to drive around that town at night. He was about 5'6", slim with long limbs and a sunken face. His whole body screamed zombie, and his face was twisted in anger. He wore a dirty neutral-coloured hoodie, but in the dark, I couldn't tell much. I managed to lock the doors, but still couldn't figure out the gears. I was totally frozen, staring at this man slinking toward me. He put his hand on the hood of the car, and it's cracked and bruised and dirty. I muster enough courage to look at him in the face, and I'll never forget seeing how much blood was just dripping off of him. I couldn't tell if he was badly injured because his face was just so dirty and bloody, but I had more than enough time to look. He crept up to the driver's side and tried to find the handle as I was trying to figure out the gears. I managed to pop it into neutral, and the truck made a strange noise that took him aback, but I wasn't moving, and he slammed his face against the window. He looked like he was bleeding from his eyes, but he definitely wasn't in pain. I mean, he laughed as I was panicking, and I could hear him tugging on the handle. Somehow, no other cars had stopped to help, even though I saw them passing by. I managed to find the right gear and tried to take off, but for some stupid fucking reason, I wanted to be a decent person and not run him over, so I took off slowly. I barely pressed on the gas when he pulled out a gun. I shrieked and slammed the gas and dragged him a bit. He had his arm wrapped around the side mirror and he yelped and let go. I took off going 60 down the 35 to my house. And when I got in a full-on panic, my mum just chastised me for barging in like I did. When I tried to explain it, to my shame, I started to throw up and had to run to the bathroom. When I came out and explained, they told me to quit being a pansy and call the cops. For some reason, I was in trouble for almost being carjacked. I called the police and the dispatcher said that I wasn't the only one calling about a man with bleeding eyes. After telling my parents, to which my mum was, well, gently put, skeptical, the doorbell rang. A deputy was at my door and asked to speak with me. My mum sent me in front of the officer, hoping that I'd confess to staging a hoax or apologize, and he asked me for a description. I gave him one and took him to the truck to show him the bloody face print on the window. He had someone take a sample, and he told me that they had a suspect in custody who perfectly matched my description of the man. He had a road rash and a dislocated shoulder, but wasn't in any mortal harm or anything. The cop left me with the number of his badge and squad car and told me to call him if I ever needed help with this again. He later appeared on the local news, giving a statement to a string of attempted carjackings by a man who was reported to be on cocaine. He said that with the help of the people who gave statements and descriptions, and the fact that he had a unique injury, finding the correct guy was pretty easy. He was carrying a loaded handgun that had not been fired, and no one but him was injured. The deputy said that the man had been in a fistfight nearby, and had gotten beaten bloody, and the strange appearance of blood from his eyes was from ruptured blood vessels in his eyes, and blood from his cheeks. He said that the man was in a stable condition and cooperating. He was sentenced on a drug charge, and I haven't heard anything about it since. But needless to say, when he pulled that gun, it scared the shit out of me. Back in 2007, age 19, I moved from my hometown to the nearest big metropolitan to attend university. I had spent most of the previous summer working 2 jobs, including one at a medieval store, part of a bigger chain. We sold outfits, swords, jewelry, gargoyles, and all sorts of figurines and knickknacks too. I had been a really good employee during my tenure, and when I told my manager that I was moving and had to quit, he very kindly mentioned that one of the stores from the chain actually needed an employee right in the city that I was moving to. Needless to say, I was pretty thrilled about this. He forwarded my CV to the manager in the other store, and she replied that she'd gladly take me on as soon as I moved. So, summer goes by and I moved to the big city, and in September I start working off the new location. At first, Let me describe the surroundings a bit. The store was located in the oldest part of town, and considering the city is 375 years old, those buildings have a lot of history. The street was long and narrow and cobbled, very busy in the summer, swarming with tourists. The store was on the bottom floor of a tall, very narrow building. The store's dimensions were like 16 feet wide for 65 feet deep, approximately, with 25 feet tall cathedral ceilings. The top floors were occupied by a busy bar or pub. There was only one door, spilling out directly onto the street, flanked by a big display window where we would put mannequins dressed in our wares. The very back of the store had another mannequin-adorned display window, but no door, since the street parallel to ours was actually 35 feet below. That part of town had been built on a very sloped land, so every street going down to the river was lower than the other. This is pretty important to the story. There's this one access to the store, and that's through the front door. The minute I stepped into the store, I immediately felt that something was off. It was stifling in there, like the air was heavy. I was immediately uneasy, but I couldn't exactly spit on a job that actually paid well, where I knew what to do, and quite well, and that worked out with my student schedule, so I just tried to bury my concerns and got to work. I got along really well with my new co-workers. I became good friends with the manager, and the money was good and things were going swimmingly. But boy, was I feeling on edge whenever I had to work or close up shop alone. The store was dark and long and narrow, lined with gargoyles, mirrors, swords, and mannequins. But to close, you had to go all the way in the back, in the storage room, flip off all the breakers, and then head back all the way to the front of the shop in pitch darkness to get out through the front door. Needless to say, I pretty much sprinted out of there as soon as the lights were off. Now, we could chalk all of this uneasiness to the actual decor and architecture of this place, but not once did I feel any of that in my old store back in my hometown. And it had also been in the older part of town in a truly ancient building. Nothing tangible happened for a month or two. I was feeling weird and uneasy, but I couldn't say with any kind of certitude that something actually was there. And then, around late fall, around Halloween actually, I know, cliche as fuck, stuff started happening. I was opening the store one morning, and as I entered the shop, a massive gargoyle that had been on a shelf at least 16 feet up was in the middle of the floor, like it had been put there on purpose, facing the door. And that was not a light gargoyle by any means. Needless to say, I was a little unnerved. After that initial event, I would find stuff misplaced all the time. Things finding themselves in weird places, like figurines in our bathroom, things on shelves switching places, hanging things crashing to the floor with no warning whatsoever. And then there were the steps. The floor of the store was old, worn hardwood that was very creaky and unforgiving. The slightest weight on it would make it crack and creak in the most obvious way, and it would start cracking all the time, even if no one visible anyway, was stepping on it. There were many instances of hearing steps when I was just standing behind the cash register, doing my thing. One night, I was working with my manager, let's call her Jay, and I let it slip that some weird things were happening. I was expecting her to laugh and reassure me that I was making things up, but the face she made definitely let me know that I wasn't the only one experiencing things. And she spilled everything. She told me about things moving, furniture rattling, steps, things flying off shelves, and feeling of a deep uneasiness. The unsettling thing, though, is that Jay is one of the most skeptical people I know, and even she was a little freaked out. So, Right there and then, I had confirmation that at least some of my experiences were completely outlandish. I worked there through winter, and things had stabilized in some way. The stuff was still happening, but I had started to get used to it and would just be mildly annoyed when I'd come in the morning and find things in odd places. But by the time that summer rolled around, however, things had started escalating. Whatever was inhabiting the space had decided that moving things wasn't enough. It decided to start messing with us. Not just with me, too, but the whole staff started experiencing things. Even my manager, with the sensitivity of a teaspoon and the most skeptical of employees, was starting to freak out. An employee that I'll name C came in one morning and she was sweeping the floor by the changing cabins that were covered in large mirrors, and she swore that she briefly saw a figure that definitely wasn't her in the reflection. When I got to work later that day, she was standing behind the cash register by the door and it looked pretty shaken. She basically hadn't moved all day, too scared to get close to the mirrors, and honestly, I didn't really want to either. She told me how she'd brushed all of the little things off, but that was definitely something she'd never experienced before, and she was really freaked out. Another employee, E, was definitely not the scaredy type. A big guy, very skeptical in his ways, and definitely scoffed at our concerns. Well, one night, as he was closing with our other male employee, H, he felt a very cold and very solid hand between his shoulder blades pushing him. It was the most physical thing that ever happened to any of us directly, and I find it very interesting that it picked one of the most skeptical out of all of us to manifest like that. In any case, E was obviously seriously freaked out, and just tried to explain it away, but of course, how the hell do you justify an ice-cold hand pushing you in the middle of a store with nothing near you? He was actually very tall too, towered over all of us by a head, so whatever touched him had to be tall too. H, who was present and standing behind the cash register a good 12 feet away in front of E, didn't see anything touch him. H, incidentally, had one of the scariest experiences too. It happened the summer before I started working. On a busy night, he was wrapping something for a client behind the cash register counter. On the wall behind the register, he hung some swords. It was actually the most structurally sound wall in the whole place, so it made sense to hang the heavier swords there. And they were permanently locked in heavy custom-made brackets with padlocks. So you really had to want that sword for us to unlock it because, man, it was a pain in the ass. But for no reason whatsoever, one of the swords fell out of one of the brackets and literally slashed his face, out of nowhere. I mean, we kept those swords religiously locked. The odds of someone leaving a bracket open were slim to none, and even then, they were really heavy swords that needed some force to get off those brackets. Unfortunately, poor H needed to get 4 stitches on his cheek too. He was never the same after the incident too, and was very affected by the vibe in the store. I think he was highly sensitive and definitely picked up on the negative energy in the store too. He quit the following summer because he'd just become too scared of working on his own there. Needless to say, I absolutely didn't want to work by myself either. The only one of us who seemed unaffected was M, the most skeptical of all the staff. M would literally burst out laughing and make fun of us when we spoke about things happening. It's an old building. Things settle. The walls are soft. Someone with a spare key is pulling a prank on you all, etc. She didn't believe anything and thought that we were all collectively freaking ourselves out. And I think that her dismissal angered or bothered whatever was haunting our store, and it may have explained some of the escalation of events. The entity got more aggressive, and started literally breaking things. We'd come to work to find things shattered and stuff would hurtle off the walls and come crashing down beside us. We'd hear furniture rattle in the back store and played rock, paper, scissors to find out who would have to go in there to turn off the light breakers in there at night. I was so terrified that when I closed, I pleaded with my boyfriend at the time to come and get me so that I wouldn't have to close on my own. And I was once locked in there during my shift. I was rummaging for a box and the door slammed behind me. The key, which I'd sworn that I brought in with me, was nowhere to be found. Thank God that my manager Jay was there with the spare key to let me out. That also happened to her and to E as well. We were all on edge, well, all of us except for M. That is, until one morning. I got to work and Em was already there, and she'd gotten there early to chill and eat breakfast, but when I got there, she was standing in the back of the store and was looking a little freaked out. I asked her what was up, and she told me that when she'd gotten in, there had been that heavy feeling to the store, like the place was crowded by bad energy. She tried shaking it off, but could not for the life of her feel good or truly alone. She felt watched and was not liking it one bit. I think that the fact that she was actually physically feeling it was what freaked her out the most. And sadly for her, the feeling never really went away. So she also quit in late summer. She was just feeling on edge every time that she worked and not like herself, and literally told us that she felt that if she stayed, she might go crazy or something. Obviously, that definitely did not cheer us up. I mean, our staff was up and leaving en masse. We were scared to work and saw things in mirrors, and even my notably spiritually insensitive manager was feeling like she was going a little insane. Things kept being weird and intense all summer and subsequent fall, and even clients picked up on the vibe. One woman in particular refused to come into the store, claiming that there was something in the store that didn't want us there. And honestly, that freaked me out so much. I felt cagey and on edge all day after that. I was jumpy. I had nightmares. I mean, my sleep was hell. I was also in uni full-time and working full-time, and I was exhausted and just really over it by this stage. By the time that winter rolled around again, I was ready to throw in the towel. But Christmas came and went, and after that, it got really dead in our part of town. I live in a really snow-cold winter climate, and most of our clients were summer tourists. In other words, the business literally went dead after December until at least March. So, I spent entire days alone at the store with one of two clients in my entire shift. And man, it was awful. I was waiting to land another job to quit, but then something happened that was the proverbial cherry on the cake. One fateful February day, I'd gone to work knowing full well that I probably wouldn't get a client that day. It was dark, grey and snowing and windy as fuck that day, full on storm mode. Honestly, I wondered why I even bothered showing up. It would have been smarter to just close that day. But my manager was working with me, and I decided that I didn't want to leave her alone, so I get to the store and it's dark and gloomy in there, and my manager is there already kind of throwing a fit. Apparently, when she looked at herself in the mirror when she'd gotten there earlier, she felt like she wasn't looking at herself. It's hard to explain, but she had the distinct feeling that it wasn't her in the mirror staring back. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I kind of understood what she meant. She kind of lost it at this point and started just yelling at whatever was there to leave us and to stop messing with us. It had basically just happened as I arrived, and for the rest of the day, we were both jumpy and on edge. Of course, there wasn't a single client, and It was mid-afternoon, dark outside because the sun sets early in the winter, so it was dark indoors too, and it was just plain miserable. We were sitting in the middle of the store, where there was a decorative couch that we actually used all the time, and lacing a big pile of bodies that we'd gotten earlier that week, when we heard one of the tables in the back of the store rattling. When my manager went to check, she called me over, and an entire display of little leather pouches that had been painstakingly arranged on the table had been just tossed right off. Little pouches were everywhere, and the table was askew, and there were long scratches that had been gouged into the surface. Not deep by any means, but they were definitely there. And obviously, we freaked the fuck out at this. And that's when my manager noticed that the mannequins in the back display window, they were facing inside the store and not out as they should have been. She asked me if I had moved them today, and obviously I hadn't. The only time that we would actually move those was when we changed their clothes. No one could have possibly moved them since the only door to the store was all the way at the opposite end. I then noticed that every single mannequin in the store was actually turned towards us, including the ones in the front display window. How or when that happened, I'll never know. I mean, I still have no explanation to this day. If it was a prank, it was so well orchestrated that I wonder what kind of mastermind had this much time to waste, scaring the fuck out of a little team of hapless teenagers and young adults just trying to get by. I mean, my hands are shaking even talking about this. But to this day, it's definitely one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. Realizing that all the mannequins have been turned towards us, it gave me a heart attack. I still get major shivers whenever I tell people about this experience too. I felt watched and so unsafe that it was horrifying. My body was in fight or flight mode and I felt physically ill. I had to get out of there, and not a minute too soon too. And that's pretty much when I decided that it was enough. I pretty much told my manager, okay, that's it, I've had enough and I'm leaving this place and never coming back. Fuck this, I'm going home. But she didn't want to stick around either, so we just grabbed all our shit and left right there and then. Didn't turn off the breakers, didn't do any closing procedure. We just got our shit, put the key in the door and hightailed it out of there. And after that day, I never went back. The owners decided to close for the remainder of the winter the week after that, and we all got an unemployment benefit until we found new jobs, and when they opened again in April or something, I told my supervisor when he called me offering me a job that I'd rather literally die than set foot in that store again. I walk in the front of the old building a few times a year when my errands take me to the old part of town. They closed the store permanently a few years ago, and to this day, it remains vacant. I ran into the barmaids and waiters that worked upstairs a few times. We'd often chat on our respective porches when we got out to smoke back when I worked there. Last summer, I was walking on the street below the shop and ran into one of the barmaids. We started catching up, and she was telling me how our old store was still vacant, and that whoever visited it, to open something in it, would back out of it last minute or change their minds. I decided to bite the bullet and ask her if anything strange or uncanny had ever happened in the bar, at the risk of looking a little strange. And she looked at me with big eyes and nodded. She said, all the time, the chairs flying, bottles shattering, barmaids and waiters hearing weird sounds at night, doors closing of their own volition, and a plethora of others. We exchanged stories for a good hour after that. I'm quite convinced that that entire building is haunted or something, and honestly, It wouldn't surprise me in the least in that part of town where most of the buildings are 200 plus years old. I never quite knew what it was that was there, what its motivations were, but one thing was for sure. It definitely did not want us there. Let me mention that I'm kind of a scientist at heart. I would never label myself a skeptic by any means, but I do love a good logical scientific explanation. If I could have debunked any of the events I mentioned, I would have gladly done it. But there are no words and not a single explanation that I could possibly have for that horror and the sense of dread and the events that unfolded where I worked there. And even now, nearly 10 years later, you could never pay me enough to set foot back in there. Not in a million years. I've never told anyone this story because, honestly, I never thought that anyone would believe me. I was home alone one evening and had gone to sleep for the night. I live with my SO and my 2 indoor cats, but she was out of state travelling for business. I woke up in the middle of the night. I wasn't sure of the time, but it was completely dark, because my body was freezing cold. I actually like it cool when I sleep and usually have the temperature around 70 degrees or colder since I live in central Texas. But it was different. I was cold, but wrapped in blankets. It was the middle of summer, so evenings aren't cold here. And when I grabbed my phone to look at the time, it seemed to be off, and I pressed the on button, but it didn't turn on. Since I was half asleep, I just shrugged it off, and I walked out of my bedroom to go adjust the thermostat and noticed that the cats weren't around. This was weird because these furballs are always hanging out on the bed and around the bed. Anyhow, I walked to the thermostat and tried to adjust it, but the power to the thermostat, I have a Nest, was nil, and the power to the house seemed to be off. I peeked out of the upstairs window to see if any of my neighbours were having any power issues and noticed that all of their outdoor lights were working just fine. From the time that I woke to this moment was probably 1 to 2 minutes maximum. I decided to wander downstairs to grab some water, but am startled when I realised that there's a glow of light coming from the first floor. The way my house is situated, I couldn't see the light until I approached the stairs. I found this odd because the power seemed to be out just upstairs, which didn't make a lot of sense. So I started walking down the stairs and began to hear a faint humming noise. The noise had a high pitch to it with arbitrary pulses of low sounds, almost like a muffled weed whacker that someone is throttling at random. As I continue to walk down the stairs, I spot a dark, slowly moving figure in the room with light at the bottom of the stairs. The next step that I take feels like I've walked off the side of a cliff or was sucked into the floor. That's really the best way that I can explain it too, because I don't remember what happened after that. I just lost all feeling from my body. My next memory is waking up again to the sound of my phone's alarm, and everything seemed back to normal. I sat there in bed, the cat's back to being lazy in bed next to me, and tried to think about the 2-minute incident that happened in the middle of the night. I am not a sleepwalker, and I was definitely not dreaming. My security systems app shows the time whenever a door is opened or closed, and I realized that my security system was disarmed on the app and that the front door had been opened and closed several times throughout the night too. I pulled up my security footage from the exterior cameras and was surprised to learn that there was zero footage from the night. Like, the motion sensors reacted to a random car driving by around 10 p.m. And then the next thing is another random car in the morning. So, someone or something walked in and out of my front door, but the cameras didn't capture any footage. My neighbour across the street had a good security system that points at my house, so I asked him if I could review the footage from his cameras. I told him some made-up story about how I thought someone had broken into my truck. Anyway, he said it was weird because when he pulled up the footage from that night, his cameras didn't record anything either. Just a time gap once again. My first thought was that I was sleepwalking and that the memory was a dream, but it just couldn't have been. When I looked out of the window in the middle of the night, I distinctly recall a red pickup truck parked the wrong direction in front of the neighbor's house. I always notice when cars are parked left wheel to the curb because I've gotten a ticket for this in the past. The truck was not there before I went to sleep, based on the footage, but was there in the morning, based on the footage again. So, the truck was there when I saw it in the middle of the night, which means I definitely woke up in the middle of the night, cold as ice, no cats, no working phone, or no thermostat, saw the truck out of the window, and then got warped by something on the stairs. A couple of additional things were different in the house too. The security system was disarmed, and I definitely armed it before going to bed. The light was still on downstairs, and that was absolutely off before I went to bed. My whole body as well smelled like burnt marshmallows. I know this is weird, but it's really how it smelled. And lastly, my 55-gallon fish tank that sits at the bottom of the stairs in the entryway was missing 2/3 of the water. I mean, seriously, where the hell did 40+ gallons of water just disappear to? The whole area around the tank was bone dry too, and the fish were fine. I seriously don't know what the hell happened, but I've done some research and I've looked into this since then, and everything seems to point towards some sort of abduction experience. I've had a few strange encounters over the years, but this one took the cake. It happened about 1.5 years ago, a Sunday evening around 6 p.m. I'd had a big one the night before, so I'd spent my Sunday chilling in bed watching Netflix and dozed off maybe 30 minutes before this happened. I woke up to a knock on the front door. First, to explain, my bedroom was originally the foyer of this house, so the front door opens into my bedroom. Weird, I know. It used to be a huge house, but then the landlord subdivided it and turned anything and everything into a bedroom and rented each room out separately. So the front door was like my own private entrance, and everyone else in the house used the back door, which went through the backyard that had a gate leading out onto the street. So I wake up to a knock on the front door. I assume that it's a food delivery for one of my housemates. They usually come to the front door, and if I'm not there or don't answer, they'll try calling whoever ordered, and who will tell them to come around the back. Because I'd just woken up and was still quite hungover, I figure I'll ignore it and let them arrange to meet at the back gate. After a couple of knocks, it stops and I just start to drift off again. Maybe 5 minutes later, I wake up again but don't open my eyes. I have this weird feeling though in my gut that I've never had before, that I'm not alone in the room. I lay there, eyes closed for a second, and just listen. And I can hear rustling sounds coming from my left, where my room's interior door from the living room is. And I soon realize that somebody is going through the contents of my shelf. At first, I think it might be one of my housemates looking for my bud and not wanting to wake me. But the more I listen, the more I realize that something just isn't right. I open my eyes, sit up very suddenly, turn to my left, and say, "Who's there?" It's then that I see something that sends a shiver down my spine. A man, probably in his late 30s, with a very big build and dressed in black, is standing right over my bed. I I have no idea who the hell this guy is, and I've never seen him before. And as soon as he sees me wake up, he mutters shit and disappears out the interior door into the house, closing the door behind him. Suddenly, I'm alone in my room and everything is quiet and normal. Bear in mind, I've just woken up and wasn't even sure if I was really awake or anything. I spent a few moments questioning whether that really just happened, decided that I definitely wasn't dreaming, and ran out into the living room. The guy is gone, but the back door is open and still swinging gently. I run out into the backyard just in time to hear the back gate slam closed. The gate is down an alleyway that's concealed from view by a fence. I head back into the house and check to see if anything is missing, and nothing seems to be. I ran around checking my housemates, who were all in their rooms. The guy in the room next to me confirmed that he heard knocking on the front door a few minutes earlier, but beyond that, nobody had a clue what I had just witnessed. My best guess is that this guy was looking to rob the house. I knocked on my door to check and see if anyone was there. There was no answer, and so he comes in the back and heads straight for my room as he knows that it's empty, which he can't be as sure of regarding the other rooms in the house. It's a 5-bedroom after all. When he comes in, he sees me asleep and decides to tempt fate by trying to grab what he can without waking me. But in order for him to know the layout of the house this well, he would have almost definitely have to have seen the inside before. I don't know what that means for me, but I know sure as hell that I'll be changing those locks. So this happened to me about a year ago, 2 at most. A friend of mine named Tate moved, and eventually I went up one weekend overnight to visit him. Now, Tate and we like to play video games, watch movies, typical stuff, but we also really enjoyed going outside and exploring. In his old neighborhood, there was actually a creek that we would explore for hours. So the next morning when we woke up, I asked him if there was anything like that around his new house that we could check out during the day, and to my excitement, there actually was. About a mile or so from his house, there's this 7-Eleven, and adjacent to it is a huge field that leads into the woods. So we got some drinks, and once traffic died down, we crossed the street to the field. At first, I was actually pretty bummed out because this wasn't anything like the creek, and it seemed boring. Until we got to the end of the field, which is where the woods start. We climbed down and we were in the woods now. There was nothing unusual at first. I mean, I saw a fox dash through the trees and escape in the opposite direction of where we were headed, but that was about it. But these woods were pretty creepy in and of themselves. It wasn't anything huge, but just small things that were out of place. There were styrofoam coolers littered on the ground, broken lawn chairs, a tire, broken glass, and a white tank top tied to a tree. It was just strange, so we joked about how people must have come down here to drink, or how someone must have gotten into a car accident and now lives out here or something. Eventually, though, we got deeper into the woods, and to the far right of us is a house. It's not in the woods itself. It's actually pretty far off, but you could see it from where we were. And honestly, the house looked like complete shit. It was old and looked like it was broken down, and there was a long ladder leading to the roof. On the ladder was a man wearing a reflective orange vest and baseball cap, so we couldn't see his face well. And also, he wasn't too close, so we didn't worry too much. But he actually saw us, and he stared at us for a while, and we kept moving forward. We eventually get basically to the end of the woods. We reach the fencing which separated us and the woods from the streets and cars. My friend had to take a leak, and after 30 seconds, we decided to head back to his house. I was a little disappointed, to be honest, because the creek at his old house was way more entertaining and I liked the water there. We were walking and talking and we were getting near to his house when we heard some leaves crunch somewhere behind us. We turned around and it was the man from the ladder at the house. We didn't say a word and he just stared at us. He wasn't close, but I had a bad gut feeling and we turned around and started walking quickly towards the field. We hear twigs break and leaves crunch behind us and I turned my head as I'm walking and it was the man again. He was definitely following us and wasn't saying a single word. Both times when I turned around and saw him, he didn't walk too. He just kind of stood there and looked at us. At this point, we're basically sprinting and we run up the incline to get back onto the field and out of those woods. After we got out of the field and saw cars in the 7-Eleven, we both felt relieved and we stopped. I turned around to face the woods and he was there again, right at the end of the woods, just staring at us. He didn't climb out and get onto the field, and again, he didn't communicate a single word. He just stood there, staring at us. I took a blurry Snapchat video on my phone, and I thought I saved it, but I can't find it, or else I'd try to upload it. I'm not sure if I can here anyway, but it was far and zoomed in, and all I could capture was his blurry face and baseball cap. But to this day, I think about that day in the woods. Tate is a couple of years younger than me, and I'm big, but I'm not that strong, and this was a grown man. He definitely could have tried something if he wanted to. For the life of me, I can't figure out what his intentions were and what the hell he was doing in that forest. If he was just trying to scare us, or if he would have actually hurt us or done something perverse if we didn't start running. Instead, all he did was stare at us, but man, was it creepy. For reference, at the time of this happening, I was 5 years old and male. My family had, and still to this day have, a caravan on a fairly large caravan site in Cleethorpes, on the east coast of the UK. We used to go pretty much every weekend in the summer, and honestly, I loved it. We knew pretty much everyone who had caravans in the near vicinity to ours too. 2 caravans away was a fairly old man, Mike, around 60 at the time I'd say, and his wife, who struggled to walk at the time. My dad and Mike were pretty good friends and had worked together at one stage. Because of this, we regularly went around to theirs and vice versa, and did a lot of things together whilst there. My memory of the day in question is pretty vague, as I was 5 at the time, and my parents have been reluctant to fill me in on many of the other details. So, we were all sat on Mike's balcony at the front of his caravan, and he decided to go in and make some drinks. From what my parents have told me, he then asked me to go in and help make the drinks or help bring them out. Of course, I went in and I remember the exact moment when he put his hand over my mouth. I was just getting cups from one of the low-down shelves and felt his hand go over my mouth, in the classic horror story type of way, to stop you screaming. At first, I remember thinking that he was just messing around. We did that sort of thing often, and I'm pretty sure Mike had some sort of military background, so I just assumed it was a joke. But then he started leading me through towards the back of his caravan. My memory is also pretty vague of what went on in the next few moments. I'm not really sure if I briefly passed out because at this moment he still had his hand covering my mouth, but the next memory I have is my dad barging through the door, smashing Mike against the wall, grabbing me and running out of the caravan. At the time, I had no idea what was going on, but I've recently learned that apparently he had chains set up on the bed. Every time I think about it now, I get chills. but still wonder why he would attempt something like that when both my parents and my older brother were sat just meters away. My dad says that he got us all back to the caravan and then stormed back. I don't remember any of this, and nor does my brother, but my mum has told me the exact same story. And by the time that he got back, Mike had managed to get his wife in the car and they just sped off. They apparently left their caravan unlocked and left all their possessions, and my dad said that they never called the police because he actually wanted to beat Mike up, and honestly, I actually believe him. Even now at 62, he could easily take someone out. From what my mum has told me since then, they, Mike and his wife that is, never went back to the caravan, and it was replaced soon after with another. We still have our caravan, although now with me and my brother living away, we only go a few times a year. But looking back, this is one of the only 2 times in my life when I've been in serious danger. I still don't know what the hell Mike was up to that day and why he took me at the back when it was so obvious that I'd be missing. But whatever the case, it really creeps me out to think about it. So this happened about 6 years ago. It's a story that I've told many times and will continue to tell because, honestly, it was probably the closest that I've ever been to getting killed. Or, if not killed, then kidnapped or something really horrible. The summer of 2012, me and my best friend were hitchhiking around Eastern Europe with no money like a bunch of crusty punk bums. We were 19 at the time and really bought into that lifestyle, if that's what you call it. We're over it now, though. Without boring with unnecessary details, we were making our way towards Poland from the Baltics and happened to hitch a lift in Lithuania from the Latvian border. The dude who picked us up was really friendly, but he was ultimately going a different direction, and so he dropped us off at this spot that he told us was really good for hitching. He dropped us off, and it was a large concrete area by the side of the road, in the middle of Lithuanian countryside. It was probably designed for truckers to pull in on hindsight and take a nap or whatever. On one side of the road was endless cornfields. The other side was some woods. It was pretty late in the evening and there was no traffic anywhere, so we decided to call it a night, crossed the road towards the edge of the woods and got out our sleeping bags, food, etc. by this small dirt mound near the road, by the woods. As we were unwinding, we heard a woman screaming from across the road. We immediately ran across to see what the hell was going on, and we could just about make out 2 men running away in the cornfields. We stood there in shock, and a few moments later, a car up the road pulled out of the cornfields and sped off into the distance. We just stood there in shock, wondering what the hell to do. Then, a few moments later, a policeman in a car showed up. He asked us questions in Lithuanian, and we explained to him in English that we were just hitchhikers. He said to us that this was a really dangerous place and we shouldn't be here, but then proceeded to roll up the window and drive back the way he came. We were obviously pretty spooked at this point, so we crossed the road back to our bags by the dirt mound on the edge of the woods. My friend had a shitty little rusty penknife, and we agreed to stay vigilant. It was nighttime by this point, and after a while, nothing happened. But we were still a bit scared, and we couldn't really sleep. But then, in the dead of the night, in the woods next to us, we could hear footsteps cracking the twigs and branches of the woods. They slowly got closer and closer towards us too, and eventually they stopped. We heard incessant whispering for a few moments, then heard the footsteps and the twig snapping move slowly away from us. Neither of us needed to say anything to each other because we both knew what had just happened. At this point, we were petrified, and my friend took out his shitty penknife and we just laid there, shitting it and waiting. I remember saying to him, "See you in hell, Connor," and him saying it back to me. An hour or two passed, and we were just laying there, taking turns with the knife, in case we got attacked from different angles, and not knowing what was going to happen. After a while, nothing happened, and the exhaustion kicked in, and so we just passed out. But suddenly, we were abruptly woken early in the morning, sunny by this stage, by the sound of a car really aggressively pulling up on the road, by the mound that we were sleeping behind. We heard car doors slam and footsteps stomping towards us really quickly. As we were laying down and behind a mound, we couldn't see them, but we could just feel that they were inches away from us. I'll never forget the fear that I felt at that moment. My whole body froze, and I simply thought that this was it. But they stopped, and we heard a really angry argument in Lithuanian between two men. It went quiet after what felt like an eternity, but in reality was probably 30 to 60 seconds. They just stomped back to their car and drove off. I almost vomited with relief too, and we immediately got up, packed our bags, and started walking as far as fucking possible from that area and started hitchhiking again. We're not sure what we were privy to that night, and we don't think it was a sexual assault, or else there would have been more screams. But we think that it was probably a murder. The perpetrators were likely watching us from the woods, whispering. They could have been seconds away from either killing us or kidnapping us the next morning. This all happened 6 years ago, and it's still so surreal thinking that this happened, and that we got away unscathed. I mean, we could have easily been a pile of bones in some unknown Lithuanian forest, never to be found. I'd also like to add as well that before all this happened, there was a weird precursor. We were on the Latvian and Lithuanian border, in a small village sitting on a wall. Before walking to that wall, we walked past a police car with what looked like to be two very heavily asleep police officers, possibly dead even, and some random guy shouting at them through the window. We thought it was strange and sat down on the wall, and we watched the event from a distance, before proceeding to roll some cigarettes. We both looked up again about 20 seconds later, and they had all just vanished. There was no sight of them anywhere, and it was a massively long stretch of road both ways. We both thought that it was really weird, and we hitched a lift from that wall, and it was a talking point right up until our calamity happened a few hours later. It kind of set the tone for the night, and I know it's kind of an irrelevant detail overall, but I felt that I should mention it because even though we weren't spooked, we were weirded out in a kind of harmless way, right up until shit got real. Anyway, I don't know exactly what happened that night, but something sinister was going on, for sure. My dad lives in an old miners' village, and lots of artifacts have been found, like an old key from under the floorboards or a note to a miner's wife in the walls of another house. He moved in when I'd gotten older and has only lived there for about 3 years now. Weird stuff has always happened in that house, but there's been some instances which made me question my previously non-believer stance on the paranormal. I've always relied on science and evidence in life, and I truly believe that the simplest explanation is usually the right one. The events that I'm going to talk about, however, I can't reason as being natural and don't know what to do about them. The first event that seemed off in that house was a tall man that would pass the kitchen window. I would never pay much attention as I figured it would just be a neighbour passing by, and I would continue to cook whatever I was making, giving them a smile through the window due to the friendly nature of such a small community which he would always return. I didn't know the names of the locals since I only visited my dad once a week, and we spent our time in the house watching movies alone, so there was never a chance to get to know people. Being good friends with his neighbours, though, we agreed to go over for dinner since he had been there for a few months now and I hadn't had the chance to sit down with them and talk. Over dinner, we discussed different boring topics such as unemployment, school, and the weather, until we were a couple of glasses into wine. A good-natured gossip about the neighbours began, and I started to try and place faces with names. They seemed to stop after a while, which seemed weird as they hadn't mentioned the one person that I was most familiar with. I began to describe the man who walked by regularly from his height to his bone structure, and everyone sat in confused silence as nobody turned up in this village without people noticing. The mother of our neighbour had suddenly jumped up and hurried back to her house. Around 10 minutes later, she came back with a picture of the man that I had seen for weeks now, and I confirmed that, yeah, this was the guy that I had seen, and she just nodded. She told me that his name was James, and he used to live in our house, but a few years ago, he drove down the road, into the forest, and attached a pipe to his exhaust, and then went through the window, and they found him days later. Naturally, I thought that she was just joking around, or that she had gotten confused due to her old age or something. But it wasn't until our neighbour hummed and said that she remembered the last woman who had moved in for a few months had complained about the man who always walked around outside too. Apparently, she had loudly told him to go away after getting advice from her priest, and he hadn't bothered her again. She apparently moved out though because the house felt off to her. I never had the heart to say it whenever I saw him because, as far as I cared, he wasn't doing any harm. And the second event is also pretty tame, but I still have no explanation, so it gives me chills. Being a smoker, but not being fond of the smell, I usually head outside to spark one up. I'd been having trouble sleeping this night, however, and it was around 2 a.m. Not only was I too tired to find the energy to put on appropriate clothing and shoes and trail down the stairs, but I also didn't want to risk waking my dad up since it was way too early. But this is why, instead, I hung out my window in order to have a smoke, dressed in nothing but a shawl wrapped around my shoulders for the chill. For reference, the window is in the far wall. On the opposite wall is my bed, a toilet to the right and exit to the left. I must have been about halfway through when I heard a man clear his throat very loudly from right behind me. I panic and spin around, thinking maybe that my dad had come up to ask something and was showing his disapproval of my being awake when I had work the next day. In hindsight, though, it obviously would not have been my dad, as firstly, he knows to knock, and secondly, he would never have stayed if he noticed my lack of clothing. When I do spin around, however, nobody is there, which was odd. I easily brush off occurrences like this as just normal, such as when others jump or thump in the house or something, or possibly something moving in the house, so I shrug it off and say that it had to be something falling over. But then I began thinking about how loud and clearly that I heard the noise, so close to me too, that it started to make me feel uncomfortable and a little bit shaken. The third event didn't seem aggressive, just unnatural. It had been the summer and I'd been wearing a very light shawl which I placed on the floor when I went to the toilet. This floor was covered with one large sheet of vinyl, so no air would be able to flow through the cracks or gaps. As I was sitting there, I had been staring at the ceiling as there was a small spider running laps up there. But movement caught my eye, and looking down, I saw the weirdest thing that I've ever witnessed. My shawl was literally floating right in front of me, a few inches off the ground. It was raised by one part as if someone punched it and then raised their arm. I sat there, pants around my ankles, wondering what the hell I was meant to do. I felt scared to move, as if whatever it was wouldn't notice me if I stayed still. Finally, I reached forward, but the second I made contact with the shawl, it dropped, and the entire room became ice cold. The fourth event, it terrified me at the time, and honestly, it still does. It was near the end of summer, so The weather had become calm and warm. My dad and I were watching some movie in the living room downstairs when we both jumped at a bang so loud that we thought it might have been a gunshot. I get the same feeling of dread and pure fear that I got during the voice in my room, and for some reason, I run straight for the door and out of the house. Our neighbour's mother, I should mention now that she's very religious and a strong believer, sees me in such a panic and comes racing out to see what had just happened. I am embarrassingly ugly crying by this point, which again is very uncharacteristic of me, but I've never felt so threatened in my life. I tell her that something happened in the house and she goes to the front door, through which I can see my dad looking about with his baseball bat. The second she steps inside, she turns back around and hurries to her house. She returns with a bundle of sage and lights it as she steps in. She looks about before going straight to my room, and I can hear from outside her shouting at whatever was in there to leave the house as it's not welcome here. After a while, she comes back out and tells me to keep the sage burning in my room as it'll protect me. My dad leads me back inside and points up the stairs, and halfway up, I see that the hatch to the loft had been removed. Now, this thing was far enough up from the ground that no person would have been able to reach it and move it without a ladder. I wait in the kitchen as a neighbour helps my dad fix the ladder and move the hatch. And apparently, this thing was so heavy that my dad struggled to even slide it on his own. Lastly, there were some weird dreams that I had while I was there too. Maybe they're connected, maybe not. I'm not too sure, but I won't go into it. But I attempted to take my own life about a month before this, and I hadn't been to visit in a while due to low moods, but I finally got the energy to go back, and I'd been having nightmares where you can't remember what happened, just that it was bad, but this changed on my first visit. I also want to put it out there that, although I'm not discounting it, I've never had sleep paralysis or I've never sleepwalked. The nightmare was simple enough. In my dream, I woke up to whispering coming from the small walk-in closet. This closet was a meter-sized crawl space that looks like it comes from a bad horror movie. In my dream, there was smoke pouring from it and something was hacking loudly as the local radio station played. The light flicked on and an inhumanely deep voice said, "You watch him and he watches you. I watch both." I woke up terrified and covered in sweat. But the weird thing was that the closet light, it was on in the mornings, and I know that it hadn't been. I write this now because I stayed over a few nights ago for the first time in a long time, and I had another really bad dream. When I sleep, I remain curled in a tight ball and never move from my spot. I'd been having a really scary dream about something when I woke suddenly, feeling like something had jerked my ankle. I bolted awake to find myself at the bottom of my bed, closest to the now open doors of my closet, and my ankle in front of me, off the bed. I tell you this because I've never moved like this, no matter what my dream was, and it felt so real this time. I also now have 2 cuts on that ankle which bled overnight, but without any clear reason. What do you guys think? Do you guys think that this is evidence of a haunting? And if so, what the hell should I do? This sounds crazy, but can I make peace with it? Is this entity actually aggressive? And if so, can it do harm to me? Should I have told it to go away while I had the chance? And I guess, most importantly, do you think it's James? A few years ago, some random guy contacted me on Instagram. The guy was nice enough, and eventually he sent me his number. We started talking on the phone, but from the get-go, he seemed a little off. He started getting angry if I didn't pick up the phone, and eventually I just blocked him. But suddenly, I'd be getting calls from a different number, and it was always him. I blocked around 4 numbers before the calls just finally stopped. Then, a few months later, he messaged me on Instagram from a new account. In the message, he basically stated that either I send him nude images of myself with slut written all over my body, or he would send my nudes to my family, work and friends. I didn't understand what he meant by him saying that he'd send my nudes, because I knew that he didn't have any of me. So I ignored the message, but an hour later, he sent me an image. He had found a girl who looked very similar to me, actually. And honestly, it was just because I knew that I never took any pictures that the woman was definitely not me. Otherwise, she was the spitting image. I reverse image searched the photo and found the actual woman in the pictures. But still, I was obviously pretty scared. He could send out this woman's image and say it was me. And while I could message everyone and let them know that it wasn't, I'm 100% sure that not everyone would believe me and think that I'm covering up the fact that I sent images to strangers online. My family is actually pretty conservative at best, so this was really getting to me. I go into this man's profile, and I remember a cold sweat coming over me as I saw that the people he followed were all the people that I follow, and basically everyone I know. I didn't know what to do except message the guy back with a threat to go to the police. He deleted the messages that he sent me, and I deleted my Instagram account and instead began using my personal account, which is now set to private. On my account, I also blocked the man's profile, and I just hope that he never finds me again. The internet can be a dangerous place, and I still have no idea how he got all the information of my friends and family. This was quite a while ago, so please bear with me. I was a sophomore in high school, finishing up band practice, and it was in the afternoon, maybe 7:30, and me and my friends are talking for a bit. We always chatted a bit after practice to avoid the crowd of people in the band hall. Plus, it gave us a chance to unwind a bit. We see one of our friends, a freshman, talking to his dad and his little sister. Now, none of us had never spoken to his dad before, but we had heard things and knew he was just a bit, shall we say, off. So that's why we didn't really question what happened next. My friend was chatting for quite a bit, and finally, the dad calls us over. Now, the guy my friend is talking to looks remarkably like him. Same hair, same skin tone, very similar mannerisms too, and the guy is pretty greasy looking, and he seems visibly uncomfortable and is obviously in a huge hurry to get out of there. He was shuffling about and won't keep eye contact. And he seems to be eyeing us up in a strange way. But again, he's our friend's dad, and we knew that he was pretty strange, and so we were not really thinking much of the whole situation. He talks about how he wants us, and me and 3 of my friends, all trombonists, to play for him in a Cuban jazz ensemble that he's putting together, apparently. We're all pretty big into jazz at this time, and he mentions how we'll all be getting paid for both practices and performances, and we're all very excited. He's really insistent on us leaving with him that moment to meet the rest of his bandmates, and me and my friends are all for it. Now, we haven't really been noticing this girl that was standing next to him this whole time. She's been really quiet this whole conversation, but she was very visibly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Our band director had noticed us by this time and walks on over. She was a very no-bullshit, hard-ass kind of person. She comes and asks, "Who's this guy?" And of course, I think she's mad because we've been taking our time and putting our stuff away, so I just respond, "Oh, he's our friend's dad, and he..." And right then, my friend cuts me off and says, "What? He's not my dad." Now at this point, the man gets very irritated. Our director tells him that he needs to leave, and this is when I start noticing the little girl more. First of all, she looks nothing like this man. This is pure conjecture on my part, but her skin color, her eye color, hair color, none of them matched him. And the man starts arguing with my director, saying how she can't talk to him like that, and he seems like he's about to punch our director, in fact. By this point, he's attracted some attention, and our two other directors are here as well. The little girl is grabbing him by the shirt, trying to keep him back. She's not crying, but her voice seems like she's about to. She's pleading for him to stop and asks him to please just go home. Now, this is the first time the girl spoke to me, and so this is when I first get a good look at her. And she was really, really thin, wearing a t-shirt and shorts, and is younger than us by maybe a couple of years. She also has some pretty obvious bruises, and as mentioned above, looks nothing like her dad. Finally, it seems the man's given up, and he's attracted quite a crowd, and he shuffles off. He doesn't really run to his car, but he goes off as fast as he can without actually running, tugging the little girl at his side. They call the cops, and the cops circle the area looking for him or his car, but there's no sign, and we never saw him again. After the incident, we spoke to our friend about it, and he mentioned how the little girl approached him first, and tried to get him to get into their car before the man finally got out of the car and started to talk to my friend himself. I'm still not too sure what was going on that day. I don't know what would have happened to us had we gotten in the car with him as planned, but it definitely psyched me out for a bit, and I had completely forgotten about the incident until I was browsing Reddit and stuff, and it all just came back to me. Finally, I'd like to add that we've since met the friend in question's dad, and they actually look remarkably similar, which is kind of a weird coincidence. And whatever happened that day, it still sits with me really uncomfortably. So, this happened about 3 or 4 years ago when I was on a holiday at the West Lake in Hangzhou in China. I live in Beijing for reference, and I do speak Chinese. My girlfriend and I, we had been walking around the lake for a couple of hours, and I needed to go to the toilet, so we were looking for a public bathroom. It's a pretty touristy area, so after another couple of minutes of walking, we finally found one. Inside the bathroom, there were 2 urinals on each wall, so they came together in a kind of L shape. Nobody else was in there at the time, and I headed to one of the urinals closer to the corner, and as I was trying to pee, I saw somebody to my right in my peripheral vision. They were just stood in a way that it didn't feel right, so I turned my head, and it's this homeless guy. Dirty torn clothes, messy matted hair, dirt all over his hands and face, and he was just staring at my junk. I was obviously kind of taken aback, so I just said to him in Chinese, "What are you looking at?" And without moving his eyes away, he replied, "You." His answer really unsettled me a bit, and I just said, "Well, could you not, man?" Right after I said that, somebody else comes into the urinal on my left, and in that high-pitched voice that you use to mock people, he goes, well, could you not?" I look over at him, and it's another dirty homeless-looking guy who also starts looking at me. I was really quite shaken at this point, and far too nervous to pee there, so I zipped up and fast-walked from the urinal to a cubicle where I locked the door. I tried to pee again, but I heard a sound. The locks were those kinds where there's a slit on the outside bit that you can open with a coin. I didn't think about that until I turned around and saw the first homeless guy just looking at me from outside the now open cubicle. I think he was just smiling, but that might have been just my mind making it creepier in retrospect. And well, peeing was definitely off the cards at this point. I actually ran out of the bathroom, found my girlfriend, and we power walked for about 15 minutes to get away from those creepy fuckers. So this happened when I was about 7 years old to my uncle. He's no longer with us, and I want to share his story. Growing up, I lived in northern Michigan on 5,000 acres of farm and ranch land that backed up into state land. Nothing but miles of forest and pastures could be seen, and needless to say, it pretty much made us tough, and it takes a lot to spook all of us now. But we're all avid hunters, fishermen, and outdoorsmen, and being the only girl, I was raised as a tomboy, and I'm still the same. My uncle, he went off to join the military, becoming a senior NCO in a prominent Special Forces division of the US Navy. He was about 6'4", built like a wrestler, obviously skilled in survival tactics, and nothing ever rattled him. He was home on leave, and we went out hunting as it was deer season. I remember him coming in the house and just shaking and crying and saying that he saw something in the woods. My uncle, he never cried. I mean, he was as tough as nails and would tear someone to shreds before he'd let them make him cry. My grandmother tried to get him to make sense, but he just kept saying that he saw Bigfoot mixed with a wolf. My granny immediately got my grandfather, and he rounded up the rest of the guys hunting. My dad, a few male cousins, and my uncle, who was still terrified but went because he didn't want to be labeled a chicken, and they got all their shotguns and ammunitions and saddled the horses to clear the woods. Apparently, they were aware of this dog man, but I was blissfully young and ignorant at the time. They told me to stay inside, and for no reason was I to step outside of the house until they returned. I had never heard my dad and grandfather so serious, so I just hid in my room. Sunset comes and they still aren't back. I'm really worried at this point because they've never stayed in the woods until after dark. Shortly after, though, I heard the sound of horses running to the barn and their voices, and man, was I relieved. They looked troubled, though, when they came into the house, but didn't say anything, probably to not spook me. At dinner, though, my dad laid down the law, and I was no longer allowed to play outside or go to the barns alone. I had to have my grandfather with me at all times. Of course, I was upset by this and felt my independence was being taken away from me, but I obeyed. The next morning, my dad and grandfather taught me how to shoot, and after that, I knew it was pretty serious. I actually overheard the adults talking the next night too. Apparently, there were tracks where my uncle had his sighting of this wolf thing, and there were definitely dog tracks. As I said before, we're avid outdoorsmen and hunters, and we can definitely identify tracks easy, but this one, it was difficult to identify. And about 8 foot up in a tree were these claw marks. No Michigan bear could make those, and we also found claw marks of about the same height on multiple trees throughout our property. Had cattle mutilated, and not in the way a coyote or bear would, and it lasted that whole winter. We actually lost about 30 to 40 cattle that winter, and all of them were mutilated. All with the same wolf dog tracks in the snow too. I really feel like this experience kind of changed my uncle. He did multiple tours in the Middle East for Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom before he, took his own life. But after that experience, he was just never the same. He went from not ever drinking to never seeing him without a bottle of Jack, and his eyes were always haunted. He changed his personality and never went out in the woods again. He quit hunting, and he eventually just quit coming home to visit on leave. He didn't even come home for my dad's funeral 2 years later. Honestly, it was heartbreaking to see him deteriorate the way that he did. And I truly believe that he saw something out there, and ultimately, it did kill him. A little while back, I decided that I needed to get back out there and start trying to meet people. Not necessarily actively looking for a relationship or anything, but meeting people at the bars it wasn't working for me, so, as most single college girls do, I downloaded a dating app. I met a lot of people and talked to them online, and it gave me the confidence to try and actually go out on a date every now and then. I didn't meet up with many of these guys in person, but there were a few. Most didn't lead to a second date, but there was one that was worse than the rest. I met this guy, Alex, and we made plans to go out to dinner. He said that he wanted to take me to this nice restaurant in the town between us, but when the day came, he never answered his phone. The next day, he contacts me with a story about getting stuck at work and forgetting his phone at home. Whatever. Excuses, and I wasn't really buying it, but he asked to reschedule. And stupidly enough, I said yes. So, the day comes and he tells me to meet him at his house, and he'll drive us to the restaurant that he made reservations at. He said to come hungry like 3 times and kept reminding me not to eat beforehand. I guess this place has big plates or something. Now, I don't really like meeting people for the first time at their home or getting into their car, but we'd been talking for over a week, so I figured what the hell. But when I got close, he calls and tells me to park in the parking lot down the road. Weird, but okay. A small driveway, I guess, or something. The trouble is, I never told him what kind of car I drove, but he pulled into the parking lot right behind me and texted saying that he was parked 2 spots down from me. And that was red flag number 1. So I get in his car, against my better judgment, and we start heading for the restaurant. Now, I didn't know where we were exactly, and I'm not really familiar with the town, but I know the restaurant that we were heading to, and it shouldn't have been more than like 10 minutes away on a major highway. But almost 25 minutes later, we're driving down some dark back road, so I looked at him and said, "Hey, where the hell are we going anyway?" And he proceeded to tell me that he hadn't told me the full story. Apparently, when he called to make reservations, it took 3 times of calling before they actually answered. And when someone finally did answer, they told him that they had moved locations and given him a description of where they were now located, like an intersection or something. My stomach dropped when I realized that we had passed that intersection probably 5 minutes before this point, and I realized that he didn't have an address punched into his GPS, even though the GPS was running. Obviously, that was red flag number 2. So, I pulled up my GPS, punched in the name of the restaurant, and it said the business was closed for the day. Red flag number 3. At this point, yeah, I know I was being stupid, but I stayed and we hung out and talked, and got to know each other. Still, the way he went about things was really creepy. When he couldn't find the restaurant, he just kind of said, "Don't worry, I know a place that we can go," then drove farther into the darkness, eventually pulling over to a trail in the woods and told me that we had to walk the rest of the way. He said that we were going to go stargazing, and the spot was beautiful and all, but the whole way through the woods to the clearing, he just kept cracking jokes about how he swore that he wasn't a serial killer or something, and telling me to promise that I wasn't going to steal his keys and take the car and leave him there. Red flag number 4. Now, I'm not sure how to explain this, but through half the night, he just kept lying to me. He would tell me these big, elaborate, detailed stories and then suddenly end with, "Just kidding, that never happened." It was funny the first time when he tried to convince me that he got so drunk one night in college that he got his penis pierced. But after 2 hours of this shit, I realized he had been just kidding about almost everything that he had said. I realized that I didn't even really know any true thing about this guy. Red flag number 5. And yes, I know I'm an idiot. We were talking about going to watch a movie at his house at some point, and he was all for it. But then, apparently changed his mind and pulled the car over in front of a park suddenly on the way back. He said that he'd rather stay here, and he kept trying to dare me to run through the park naked and ask me weirdly sexual, personal questions. Like, about specific experiences. Not even general thoughts or preferences or anything, but actual experiences. And suddenly, he demanded to know if I was going to kiss him or not before the night was over, and said that he wanted to put on chapstick first. This guy literally made me dig through my purse, looking for chapstick, while he sat in the driver's seat making a big show of licking his lips and trying to subtly rub himself through his pants. I told him that I didn't have any chapstick, so he said that that was fine, but why don't you crawl on over here and show me what you got? Cue patting his lap. I told him that I wasn't comfortable with that, and he then proceeded to reach around me and try to drag me into his lap, using my butt as leverage. I told him again that I had no intention of sleeping with him or anyone on a first date, and he began to say that that was fine, but how about a little minute or two of a preview? Cue dragging my hand onto his lap. That was obviously the final red flag, and sirens are going off in my head now. I got mad at this point. This was after he'd spent days telling me how much he hates men who try to force themselves upon women, and how he doesn't understand how anyone could do that, let alone get pleasure from it. This, after he said that he didn't want to sit too close to me while we were stargazing, so he didn't make me feel uncomfortable too. It was honestly like a switch had flipped or something. I told him that trying to force me wasn't going to make me any more likely to agree, and that I thought that he was supposed to be a gentleman and all, like he'd been telling me all the night that he was. He told me that he thought that I was scared of how big it was, and if I didn't want to, do anything with it, there were other options. Again, he tries to grab my hand. I told him again that this wasn't going to happen, and he pouted about it. I was racking my brain, trying to think of an excuse to get him to drive me back to my car, when he pulled out his phone, opened a text message thread, and then looks at me and says that he got a text from his uncle that he lived with, saying that something had happened at the house and he needed to get home ASAP. Obviously, I'm done at this point, regardless, but I hate being lied to. If you weren't having a good time, you could have just asked to call it a night. Why lie? Why make up false intentions and then deliberately act the exact opposite way of what you said? Just why? But to make things worse, he dropped me off at my car in a dark parking lot at midnight and then just drove off before I had even walked to my car. Obviously, there was not going to be a second date with this guy. But the kicker is that I drove by the old location of the restaurant a few days ago, and it had never moved. It's still open and right on the highway, and his house about 2 minutes down the road, well, that was non-existent too. So, where the hell was this guy taking me? So this happened when I was about 5 years old. I have 6 siblings, a big fat Greek family, and we lived in a normal safe suburban area in the Midwest. My mum had always drilled into my head and my siblings' heads not to talk to strangers, especially adult strangers. She would always say if an adult is ever asking anything from a child, something is probably wrong. Anyway, I was playing outside with my older sister. She would have been 7 at the time. Our house was on a corner, so we had the main road and then the road leading into the neighborhood. We had just got our first family dog, and she was a beagle, so she was tiny, and we had her tied up to one of our trees. I remember being by the puppy and playing with her by myself for a little bit, and at that point, she was only about a month or 2 old. A gold sedan pulled up along the road, leading into the neighborhood, and a grown man got out, probably in his mid-30s, and he called out to me, and it went like this. "Hey, that's my dog." No it's not. This is our dog. Her name is Corky." "No, really, that's my dog. I lost her and I've been looking everywhere for her. Come here, I have a picture of my dog and I'll show you and you can see that it's mine." I distinctly remember taking 2 steps forward and then all sorts of alarms started going off and I couldn't say anything. At this point, my sister had noticed too and came over and was standing beside me as I was just shaking my head no to the man. My brother had been in charge of babysitting my sister and I and must have heard the conversation from inside because he ran outside and started yelling at the guy, asking if there was a fucking problem. At that point, the man got in his car real quick and sped off. I always wonder just how different my life would be today if I had been too naive of what horrible things adults are capable of back then. So I'm super grateful to my big brother who saved my ass that day and to my mum who made me paranoid and for good reasons. These events took place over a couple of months. It still haunts me to this day and is a lot of the reason why I am the way I am. A little backstory first. I have 5 siblings, 6 of us total, and when this happened, my oldest brother was 14, so I would have been 3 at the time, given that we are 11 years apart. I'm the baby of the family. This happened at a very fragile time in my parents' marriage. My dad definitely was not the best father and had actually cheated on my mother a number of times. For the record, I've asked my siblings to write this since they were older at the time, but no one has, so I'll recount it to the best of my ability. There was a lot more that happened, but I'll talk about 3 occurrences that stuck with me. I was eating something with my sister watching TV with her at night, and the rest of my siblings and my parents weren't home. We only had 1 car at the time, and my mum had to go pick up my dad and leave us at the home sometimes. I remember going into the kitchen to throw something away with my sister, and we had a big window in the kitchen and the garbage was right beside it. My sister screamed and we both noticed a man's face pressed up against the glass, looking in at us with a flashlight and smiling. My mother soon got home and we told her what had happened. She flipped out and called the cops and also told my neighbors to keep an eye out. This actually happened a number of times and it turned out to be multiple men too. And strangely enough, they always seemed to get away right before the cops got to us or right before my mum got home. I remember her cutting down the bushes in front of our house because these men would actually hide in them. I also remember them breaking one of our windows in our kitchen at one point. On a separate night, I remember being alone with my 1 brother and 1 sister closest in age to me, and they would have been 4 and 6, I think. I don't know why we were alone, but I do remember it distinctly. The men, they came back and were pounding on our front door and throwing things at our windows. All 3 of us ran into my parents' room upstairs and locked the door. I remember crying with my sister, and my brother telling us not to cry and that we could pretend to be other people, brave people so that we wouldn't be scared anymore. Surprisingly, it actually worked, and my parents got home soon after then. We were literally on lockdown at this point, and I was terrified of everyone. My brother also tells me one night that the phone rang right when my mum had left to get my dad, and he answered it, and it was one of the men, and he laughed and said, "You people are so fucking stupid," and just hung up. One of the last nights that this went on, I remember being in bed and my sister waking me up and taking me with her to the landing of our stairs. Our stairs faced our front door, and my brother was sitting on the landing pointing a shotgun at the front door, and all my siblings were huddled beside him. I didn't know what was happening, or even really what a gun was, but I knew that whatever was going down was really bad. I sat down next to my siblings, and no one talked. I remember having a stupid T-Rex toy that I was playing with, and it was as if time had stood still, but then, there it was. The man, banging on our front door and yelling things outside. I don't know why or if the men had done it, but our front door was unlocked. It felt like forever when, finally, my brother spoke, and all he said was, "Come in," while pointing the shotgun. All the sounds stopped, and we just sat there and waited. But no one ever came through the door. My parents got home soon after, and my dad actually caught one of these guys and beat the absolute shit out of the guy. The cops came soon after all of this and told us that they had news. Apparently, our phone lines were being tapped, and that's how the guys always knew when we were alone at the house. I don't know if the cops knew or charged any of these men with anything, and my mum doesn't like talking about it because she's a different person than she was 20 years ago. And now that I'm older, I realise that we never should have been left alone at the time. Period. But my mum was not well, and she was madly in love with my dad and was obsessed with making sure that he wasn't cheating. A lot of the time that this was going on, she wasn't picking him up. She was actually watching him at work and making sure that he wasn't cheating, all the while leaving the six of us alone to fend for ourselves. I realise how insanely selfish this is, but I've forgiven my mum for it. She's still with my dad, and I'm working on a better relationship with both of them at the moment. Looking back, it doesn't feel real. I mean, we found out all of this happened from a psycho bitch that my dad cheated with, who got her loser middle-aged guy friends to terrorize a bunch of children. For the record, I actually found this woman and sent her the nastiest message a few years ago when I turned 19. This stuff, it kind of keeps me up at night sometimes. I'm hyper alert to sounds and am extremely paranoid at night, especially when I'm alone. These pieces of shit impacted my life in such a way that they'll never know. But through it all, my siblings have remained really close, and my brother is a super badass for stepping up and caring for us the way he did. He still tries to this day to be our protector, though we've all grown up by now. I now realize that what's important is that none of us were hurt because, man, it could have gone so terribly wrong in so many ways. I often wonder if that guy would have come in, actually, and also wonder what these loser guys are doing now that they're in their 50s. Regardless, I hope I never see them again because, honestly, I may just kill them. I lived in the historic district of Suffolk, VA. Not the best place, but hey, what can you do? We lived in an older Victorian-style home, and I was about 15 at the time. It was a 3-story home, about 3,000 square feet, I think. So you couldn't necessarily hear anything from the other side of the house, most of the times anyway. As you walk into the house, you see the L-shaped stairs to your right, and there's an archway right ahead of you looking into the den. and the archway to your left looks into the living room. From the top of the stairs, you could see straight down to the door in the living room. So, me and my three best friends, Kay, Anna and Elle, were in a game room at the top of the stairs with my mum. It was about 10 p.m. and we spent the day at my house, and Kay, who was 17, was going to drive us all back to her house to watch her house while her mum was at her boyfriend's house overnight. I had, and rest in peace her sweet soul, a pure white German shepherd named Angel who was about 15 at the time. She barely ever barked and was kind of a large lapdog, if I'm honest. My mum was taking a picture of all four of us on the couch when we heard Angel bark, really loudly, and started to growl too. We knew immediately that something was wrong, and my mum told us to be quiet and turned off the light of the room that we were in and told us not to move off the couch, so as not to alert anything going on downstairs, if there even was anything. We immediately shut our loud teenager mouths and heard my mum going down the hallway. We then hear my mum scream, "Get the fuck out of my house, you son of a bitch." My mum is not a scared, scream your head off kind of woman, and I knew that. So I go to the hall to see my mum gripping a steak knife that she kept in the dresser right by the top of the stairs, and I hear the front door slam and thumps on my porch. And my mum runs down the stairs and turns on the security alarm, which wasn't on because we had just come in from hanging outside. My mum runs up the stairs and tells us what she saw, and it shook us all to the core. Apparently, she saw a tall man, a bandana on, a beanie on, boots, and a rope around his shoulder and arm, creeping in and starting to approach the stairs. She said she startled him and he ran out quickly, but asked us if we would stay there with her tonight as my dad was on deployment and my little brother and sister were already asleep. Kay immediately called her mum and told her what was going on, and she said that she didn't really have a problem with Kay staying back with us for a little while at least. So, whoever the hell tried to do whatever to 5 women that you knew were home alone, fuck you. And thank you to my beautiful dog. Who knows what would have happened if she didn't bark and alert us beforehand. So this just happened a few days ago, and I'm extremely shaken up by it. But some backstory. I live on the second floor of a 3-level apartment. We have a crawl space that connects all the apartments, and we aren't sure why it's there, but we have all this stuff in it, and none of us would ever even attempt to go inside of it, so we felt that it was pretty safe. The other night, the sun was setting, but it wasn't pitch black out or anything yet. I'm walking through the living room when I see a short woman on my fire escape looking into my windows. This is obviously extremely bizarre, considering that it's still semi-light out and she had to literally get out onto our fire escape somehow. We have 2 windows that the fire escape reaches, and she was looking in both, but didn't see me. I quickly crawled onto the ground and my heart was racing as I watched her try to open the windows. I didn't know what the hell to do because my phone was in the other room. But after what felt like an eternity, she finally left. I went into my room to get my phone to text my landlord and call the cops, and I came back into the living room and was looking at the windows to see if I could locate her when, all of a sudden, I hear a weird noise coming from my ceiling. We have one of those tile ceilings made out of separate slabs of cork and wood. I look up to see one of the slabs lifted up and 2 eyes staring at me. I have no idea how she got into the crawl space so quickly, but I grabbed the nearest thing next to me, which was a broom, and started hitting her with it through the ceiling and called the cops as soon as she crawled away. They showed up and searched the place and didn't find her until a few days later when she was on somebody else's fire escape. The cops said that she was definitely on some kind of hard drug and that she was actually violent towards them. So, I don't know if I escaped something or if it was a near miss, but man, when I saw her eyes up in the ceiling like that, it was freaky. This happened 4 years back. I was about 14 years old, and my parents were out and had left me and my little sister, at 10 at the time, home alone. It was about 10 or 11 p.m. when the lights go out. And this used to happen sometimes in my country, since it's kind of a new country and it's really poor here. But that time, I noticed something out of the ordinary. Only the lights in our house were out, and my neighbours, their lights were on. I had a bad feeling, so I quickly locked all the doors and closed the blinds. I told my sister to hide behind the couch and not to go out whatever happened. I hid somewhere else with a knife and tried to call my mum, but she didn't pick up, so I just sat there and waited. After sitting there for a while, I thought it was over, so I get out of my hiding place and head to the kitchen, where we had the back door to look out the window. Before I get close, I hear the doorknob turning. It doesn't work, so the person on the other side tries it again, now violently. And that's when I panicked, and I shouted, "Who the fuck are you? Get the fuck out of my house. I've called the police." I hear quick footsteps, and then nothing. I went to the other room and looked out the window, and I saw someone running out of my backyard. My sister was crying, so I comforted her while we still stayed hid until my parents came home after an hour. We told them everything, and my dad said that whoever that was, he had intentionally cut the house's electricity to scare us or something. To this day, every time the electricity goes out, I still get kind of scared, and I'm glad that we're all okay. Growing up, every summer in July and August, my family would get together and camp out for 2 weeks at White Lake State Park in Tamworth, NH. Some of my best childhood memories were actually made there. Rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, flashlight tag, and water balloon fights with my cousins and neighbouring kids in the campground made it excellent. When I was around my late teen years, my family stopped gathering together to camp out after my grandmother passed away. One of the last years that I was there, this one particular memory has always stuck with me. A little over 10 years ago, I was 16 years old. It was around 10 p.m. at night when I noticed I had missed a call on my cheap little track phone. My family was sitting around the campfire cooking s'mores and sharing some laughs, so I decided to go off for some privacy to return the call. I took a long narrow trail that winds in between other campsites that, at the end, leads up to the bathroom. I was going up to the bathroom and I just wanted to find an empty campsite and sit at a picnic table to make my call. There were plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground where I was heading was vacant. But there were no other campers in the nearby area, and it was pretty dark, so I chose a campsite and I sat down at the table. The lights from the distant bathroom from up on top of the hill behind me were illuminating my surroundings just a little bit. I called my friend and was carrying on a conversation for about 20 minutes, and as I'm sitting there, staring straight ahead, I see a silhouette coming down the road in front of me. The figure was coming in my direction, where all those empty campsites were. I could see it was a person, and it's not that unusual to see people strolling through the campground for a night walk or anything. The people I see, though, usually have flashlights, and this person didn't. I wasn't creeped out at this point. I mean, there was no reason to be, but I was just watching curiously. As the person got closer, I could see a better outline and that it was a man that I was looking at. I also noticed his pace slowed down a little bit. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continued conversing on my cell phone, and a minute or two passes. And now, he stopped moving. He's just standing there in the road, looking straight into the campsite where I'm at. I don't know if he knew that I could see him, and he was staring in my direction, and I think that I was staring right back at him. He was a little heavy-set and tall, and I could also make out that he was wearing a light jacket. I couldn't see much in the way of facial features, but I would guess that I was staring at a man in his 30s or 40s maybe. Alarm bells were going off in my head now, and my mind had turned to mush at this point. I was frozen, and I was no longer listening to what my friend was saying on the phone. I was in a stare-off with this guy. And then he started to move again. But this time, he was tiptoeing towards me, really carefully, like he didn't want to make any noise. He put one foot in front of the other, leaned forward in a slight hunch form, and it looked like he was about to charge towards me or something. In that moment, I snapped out of that mind-mushy frozen state and leaped off the picnic table and started running through the campsite, back towards the trail. I could actually hear him trampling behind me, leaves scuffling in heavy yet fast footsteps, and the footsteps were getting louder and closer. I made it back to the narrow trail, and once he got close, I heard the sound of twigs snapping and a oof noise that came from the man, which I imagine maybe he tripped or almost tripped, or maybe he got face-slapped by a tree branch or something. Most likely, he wasn't familiar with the trail like I was, but whatever the reason, it caused him to stop chasing after me. I didn't stop to look back, and I just kept running and running and running until I made it back to my family's campsite. When I got back, they were still sharing laughs and smiles by the campfire, and I broke down crying and was trembling. I explained what had just happened, and my aunt spoke up and said he probably thought that he knew you and was coming up to give you a good scare as a joke or something. She just totally dismissed me, in other words. My cousin chimed in and said, yeah, he probably stopped running after he realized that he didn't actually know you. He probably feels dumb now. And they all chuckle about it and change the subject. I think I was dismissed because no one wanted the good vibes of the night to be ruined, and the fact that I'm just a socially anxious person in general kind of let them dismiss me, I guess. I'm very cautious and shy, and for that time being, I let them convince me that I was just overreacting and overthinking. But here I am years later, looking back and just shaking my head over this. I do wish that I was taken seriously, but other than that one thing happening, it was still a good trip. My experience makes me think twice about going for a walk by myself anywhere these days, and I carry pepper spray and a mini keychain alarm on me now. Anyway, I don't know what this guy was up to, but it sure was fishy, given that he was alone in a campsite with nobody else there and was obviously trying to sneak up on me. I'm just glad that I can run pretty quickly. About 4 years ago, my wife and I moved into a condo as renters. It was beautifully maintained and freshly painted. Well, with the exception of the small bedroom upstairs. The room was poorly primered and it always felt cold. But at the time we thought nothing really of it. It was going to be a spare room that we probably would never use anyway. After about 7 months, we had our first grandchild, and we decided to move our bed to the small room and use the master bedroom as an office or nursery for when we had our grandson over. My wife, she hated the room because it was so cold all the time. Again, my wife is always cold, so I didn't think much of it, other than to get her an extra blanket. About 3 weeks after we started staying in the room, I began seeing what I thought was a child standing in our walk-in closet. It had no door and was just to the left of the bed, and I would wake my wife and tell her, but she never saw anything. Soon after, I started hearing voices as if someone was right up to my ear. "Hey, look. I'm here. Please." And these were all on different occasions too. One instance, I could actually feel breath on my ear. I was never asleep as well, as it would always occur within a minute of me getting into bed or something. I would absolutely freak out every single time. Again, my wife never heard a thing though. One night before I got home from work, my wife hears our doorbell ring. She answers the door and a girl in her early 30s is just standing there. My wife says hello and the girl says, "Hey, I'm sorry about the room, okay?" And turns around and gets in her car and just leaves. It was fucking weird. My wife is now genuinely creeped out too. At this point, I'm getting leery of sleeping in my room, so I decided to download a stupid app for my iPad that lets ghosts communicate. I know, it's stupid. If you've seen Ghost Adventures, think Ovulus. And to be honest with you, I'm more appeasing my curiosity than believing that I'm actually going to get any real evidence. A few times, it spouts random words that have no real meaning. But one night, I decided to put the iPad in the closet and turn up the volume. My wife and I, we sit in bed just listening to see if anything happens. After about 10 minutes, it just starts saying, with no more than 2 seconds of pause between each word, Richard, David, Dale, and John. This is when I immediately turn it off, and we sleep in the living room. We moved our bed and clothes out of that room the next day too, shut the door and just never went in there again. And we also moved about 6 weeks later. The reason why is because those names are my father's and my brother's names, and they're all deceased. I don't know what the hell was going on in that room, and I don't know if I ever want to. So, I was about 12, staying at a friend's house one night, and he had a big old house that was in the country with no neighbours. We were playing some Nintendo 64 one night, and his mum and sister left to go to the store to pick up a movie, so we were the only ones home. A little after they left, we heard his sister's door slam hard enough to knock a few picture frames off the wall. We looked at each other and laughed, thinking that his sister was pissed and stayed home or something. Time went by and we decided to get something to eat and went downstairs. As we were heading downstairs, we noticed that his sister's room light is on and we can hear the TV. We both grab some cereal, and as we sit in the kitchen, his mum pulls into the driveway. Next thing, his mum and sister walk in. We both look at each other and say that we thought that you stayed home, tell them what happened, and go upstairs to find her bedroom door locked and the lights and the TV on. We unlock the door and there's no one in there. Around that time, things started happening over the next couple of months too, like random noises and things being misplaced and found in weird spots. But one night, his dad works nights and goes to work, so his mum is alone with the kids, and she was laying on the couch covered with a blanket when something grabs the blanket and drags it into the basement. Like, not even opening the door, just ripping it through the crack underneath. Before she even had time to fully freak out, she hears her daughter scream and runs upstairs. She opens the door and her daughter is sitting up in her bed, which has been moved to the middle of the room, and all the pictures on one wall, they were all ripped down. She grabbed both kids and just left the house and told her husband that she would never be going back to that house, which she never did, not even to pack up or help move. Years later, I was like 19 or something, and my friend and I were drinking and sitting around a fire when people started telling creepy stories. We looked at each other and told them about what happened at his house, which neither of us really ever talked about it. The house was actually now abandoned, and as soon as we said where it was, of course, everyone wanted to go. So, the 5 of us drive out to the house in the middle of the night, and we find a way in. The house is pretty much empty, and actually not in that bad of shape. The paint started to peel and has that old empty house feel. We go through the whole house, and 3 of us are in the basement, which is all cement and has 2 rooms divided by an open doorway. We're about to go back upstairs when our buddy finishes his bottle of beer and he throws it into the other room. But it never makes a sound. Well, that was enough for us to leave. While I didn't have much happen while I was at their house, this was like my second family, and they never talked about that house or what happened. If it was ever brought up in front of his mum, the subject would quickly change, or she would just walk away.